Section 1. The Surface Layer. What everyone knows. Let's go to Springfield. Not the Springfield you half remember from a childhood bedroom with the television too loud and your parents asleep down the hall. Not the Springfield of highlight reels and meme compilations. The real Springfield. The one that has been sitting behind the jokes and the couch gags and the donut references for 36 years. Patient and strange and full of things that were never meant to be explained out loud. Because there is another Springfield underneath the one everyone knows. Deeper, quieter, stranger. And tonight, we are going down into it together. So, settle in. Get comfortable. Pull the blanket a little tighter. Turn the lights down if you haven't already. Because this is going to take a while, and the best things always do. The Simpsons premiered on December 17th, 1989. It was a Sunday night. The show aired as part of a holiday special, and the episode was called Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire. It was a Christmas story about a father who couldn't afford Christmas presents and secretly became a mall Santa to try to make enough money to give his family something decent. He failed at that too, and ended up at a dog track on Christmas Eve, betting everything on a greyhound named Santa's Little Helper who came in dead last. And in the chaos of the dog's owner abandoning the animal, Homer brought him home. The family had no presents under the tree, but they had a dog. And somehow that was enough. It was not a particularly strange episode. It was warm and a little melancholy and very funny in a way that felt accidental. Like the humor was a byproduct of people trying to tell a true story about a specific kind of American life. The kind of life where Christmas is stressful and money is tight and love is expressed through effort rather than elegance. The kind of life a lot of people recognized immediately, and they kept watching. 36 seasons later, they are still watching. 788 episodes, the longest-running American animated series in history, the longest-running American sitcom, the longest-running scripted primetime program in the entire history of television. Numbers so large they stop feeling like numbers and start feeling like a fact of the universe, like the speed of light or the distance to the nearest star. The Simpsons has simply always been there. It will, apparently, always be there. But here's the thing about a show that has been running for 36 years. Things accumulate. Layers build up. The jokes pile on top of the callbacks, which pile on top of the continuity errors, which pile on top of the buried storylines, which pile on top of the fan theories, and eventually the whole structure becomes something far more interesting than any single episode could ever be on its own. The iceberg, as it were, is mostly underwater. And tonight, we are going underwater. Let's start at the very top. The things that every casual viewer knows, the things that sit right on the surface, visible to anyone who has ever seen more than a handful of episodes. Because the surface of this iceberg is already stranger than most shows' deepest depths, and it is worth spending time here before we go lower. Homer Simpson is, by any reasonable measure, one of the most recognizable fictional characters in the history of human storytelling. More people on Earth can identify Homer Simpson than can identify the leaders of most countries. His design is instantly iconic. Round head, 5 o'clock shadow rendered as a single dark ring around his jaw, giant round eyes, 4 fingers on each hand, hair that amounts to 2 black strands forming a loose M shape, a skin color that the show's production team officially designates as Pantone 012C, a bright, warm, almost luminous yellow that does not exist in any natural human population anywhere on Earth. He wears the same outfit every single day. White shirt, blue pants, black shoes. He has worn this outfit for 36 years without variation. He is 39 years old. He has been 39 years old for 36 years. His birthday is May 12th, according to various episodes, though the show has contradicted this at least twice. He works at the Springfield nuclear power plant in Sector 7G as a safety inspector. His job, the job that stands between the reactor and catastrophe, is one he received not through competence, but through a deal struck between his father and his employer that neither man ever told him about. Homer has an IQ that the show's own creator has placed at 55. He once had a crayon removed from his brain, a crayon that had been lodged there since childhood, physically suppressing his cognitive function, and his IQ immediately climbed to genius level. He chose to put the crayon back. He has survived being shot, electrocuted, launched from catapults, mauled by various animals, struck by cars, crushed by vending machines, and exposed to enough radiation to kill a small army. He has never held a single consequence for longer than it takes for the credits to roll. He loves his family in a way that is completely unambiguous and entirely unconditional, which is, in the logic of this show, both his greatest virtue and the reason everything in his life makes a specific kind of terrible sense. Marge Simpson is Homer's wife. She is also 34 years old in perpetuity. She has blue hair, natural blue hair the show insists, that rises from her head in a tower approximately 2 feet tall, a column of perfectly sculpted waves that maintains its exact shape and height through every season, every episode, every moment of her life. She has never cut it short. She has never let it fall. Gravity simply does not apply to Marge Simpson's hair, and the show has never offered an explanation for why. Marge is the emotional spine of the family. She is patient in a way that approaches the supernatural. She absorbs Homer's disasters with a long-suffering tenderness that the show plays for comedy, but that, when you sit with it quietly, reads more like a woman who made a decision about who she was going to be in this marriage and has never once allowed herself to revisit that decision. She loves Homer. She genuinely, deeply, unflinchingly loves Homer, which is either the most admirable thing about her or the most heartbreaking, depending on the episode and depending on your mood. Bart Simpson is 10. He has been 10 since 1989. He is the oldest child, the boy, the troublemaker. He skateboards. He commits pranks. He refers to himself as an underachiever, proud of it, a label that once appeared on a t-shirt that briefly became a genuine cultural controversy when parents and educators argued it was promoting the wrong values to children. The controversy passed. Bart remained 10. His defining phrase, the one that people who have never seen a single episode of the show can still recite, is a 2-part construction. A declaration of what he did not do, followed by instructions regarding anyone who might suggest otherwise. He has said it in dozens of variations across hundreds of episodes. It has never gotten old, which is either a testament to the writing or a testament to the character's fundamental truth. Bart Simpson is the id of American childhood. He is what every 10-year-old boy secretly wants to be and is, in various quiet ways, already becoming. Lisa Simpson is 8. She plays the saxophone. She is a vegetarian, a Buddhist, an environmentalist, a feminist, a gifted student, a social activist, and the loneliest person in Springfield, which is saying something in a town full of people who have spent 36 years talking to each other without ever actually understanding one another. Lisa's intelligence is a burden the show has never pretended is otherwise. She sees clearly in a place where clarity is dangerous, and the show takes her seriously in a way that is quietly remarkable for a primetime animated comedy that also contains jokes about Homer eating things he should not eat. Maggie Simpson is one. She has been one since 1989. She communicates primarily through pacifier sounds and the occasional pointed stare. She has fired a gun. She has led a rebellion. She has an IQ that standardized tests apparently cannot measure. She says almost nothing. We will come back to Maggie. We will come back to Maggie at length, because Maggie Simpson is, when you look carefully, possibly the most interesting character the show has ever produced. And the show has been hiding her in plain sight for 3.5 decades. The town of Springfield is impossible in ways that go beyond mere cartoon logic. It has mountains and an ocean and a desert and farmland and forests, all accessible within what appears to be a fairly short drive. It borders Ohio and Nevada and Maine and Kentucky, depending on which episode you are watching. It has a nuclear power plant, a tire fire that has been burning for decades, a monorail that was built by a con man, a harbor, a gorge, an elementary school whose budget fluctuates between adequately funded and completely gutted depending on the needs of the plot, a prison, 2 hospitals, a retirement home that has been destroyed and rebuilt at least once, and a bar called Moe's Tavern where the stools are uncomfortable and the beer is cheap, and the proprietor is deeply, profoundly, almost cosmically unhappy, but keeps the place open anyway because the alternative is worse. The town's most prominent employer is the Springfield Nuclear Power Plant, owned and operated by Charles Montgomery Burns, who is ancient in a way the show has never fully committed to measuring. He has referenced personal memories from before the turn of the 20th century. He served in World War II in a capacity the show describes as morally ambiguous at best. He stole a $1 trillion bill from the United States government and hid it for decades. He is a billionaire many times over. He cannot reliably remember the name of the man who has worked for him for more than 30 years. And he is, according to at least one episode, completely saturated with every known disease simultaneously, held alive by a biological equilibrium so precarious that missing a single weekly medical treatment would kill him within 7 days. These are the things you know if you have watched the show even casually. This is the surface, the familiar Springfield, the one in the merchandise and the memes and the cultural memory of a generation that grew up watching it on Sunday nights. But the surface is just the beginning. Because once you start looking at what sits beneath the surface, once you start connecting the details that the show drops quietly across decades and never returns to, once you start treating the continuity errors not as mistakes but as evidence, once you start asking the questions that the characters themselves are somehow never able to ask, you find something that the show has been telling you all along. Springfield is wrong. Something fundamental is wrong with Springfield, and has been wrong for as long as the show has been running, and the show has been pointing at it quietly and patiently through every single episode it has ever produced. The question is not whether something is wrong, the question is what, and how deep it goes, and whether it ever ends. So let us find out. If you are watching this late at night, or early in the morning, or somewhere quiet and halfway between sleep and waking, drop a comment and tell me where you are and what time it is. I want to know who is out there in Springfield with me tonight. And if you have not subscribed yet, now is a good time. We are just getting started, and it goes much, much deeper from here. Section 2. The Yellow Skin. What the show never explained. There is a detail so visible, so constant, so fundamental to the look of The Simpsons that most people stopped seeing it approximately 30 seconds into their first episode and have not truly seen it since. Everyone in Springfield is yellow, not metaphorically yellow, not artistically stylized in some abstract way that we agree to interpret as skin tone. They are yellow, bright, warm, almost luminous yellow, the color of ripe lemons, the color of school buses, the color of a warning sign on a stretch of road where something has gone wrong. Every single resident of Springfield shares this skin tone. Homer, Marge, Bart, Lisa, Maggie, the teachers at the school, the police chief, the mayor, the doctor, the bartender, the 1,000 background characters who populate the edges of every scene, shuffling through their lives in the shadow of cracked cooling towers. Yellow. All of them, yellow. And the explanation that everyone has always accepted is simple. That is just how the show is drawn. It is an art style choice. It is a visual shorthand. The yellow skin is to The Simpsons what the color palettes are to other animated series. It is the visual language of the show, and we have agreed not to question it. Except there is one group of people in Springfield who are not yellow. Guest characters, outsiders, people who come from somewhere else. When a celebrity appears on The Simpsons, and celebrities appear on The Simpsons constantly, hundreds of them across hundreds of episodes, a parade of famous faces who have made guest appearances in Springfield, stretching back to the earliest seasons, they are drawn differently. Their skin tones are more naturalistic. Their proportions are closer to what a human being actually looks like. Their features are rendered with a fidelity to real human anatomy that Springfield's permanent residents simply do not share. This is a design choice that the show's creators have consistently explained as a way of making guest characters immediately recognizable. If a celebrity appears on the show drawn in the exact same style as every other character, audiences might not know who they are supposed to be. By drawing them more realistically, the show ensures the audience can place the face. That explanation makes sense. It is logical. It is almost certainly true. But it creates a problem that the surface-level explanation cannot resolve. Within the world of the show, within the logic of Springfield as a place that exists and has geography and physics and a consistent social reality, there is a visible, observable, consistent difference between people who live in Springfield and people who do not. The people inside the town look one way. The people who come from outside look another way. The people inside have yellow skin and bulging eyes and 4 fingers and physical proportions that deviate significantly from human norms. The people outside have normal proportions, realistic skin tones, and the kind of features you might actually see on a person walking down a real street. If you treat that difference as purely an art style choice, it disappears. If you treat it as evidence of something happening inside Springfield, it becomes the most important visual detail in the show's entire 36-year run. Let us treat it as evidence. The Springfield nuclear power plant, we know, has been leaking radioactive material for as long as it has been operational. The safety inspection that found 342 violations that Burns refused to remediate because fixing them would mean acknowledging they existed. Those violations include the direct dumping of radioactive waste into Springfield's water supply and onto public land. The fish in the river near the plant have demonstrably mutated. Blinky the three-eyed fish appeared in the second season and became national news within the show. A three-eyed fish, pulled from a river, in the town where everyone's skin is yellow, and nobody thought to draw the obvious connection. Or rather, nobody in Springfield thought to draw the connection. Because the people of Springfield, as the show has depicted them consistently across 36 years, do not draw connections. They experience events. They forget events. They move on to the next event. The logical tissue that should connect one thing to another. The three-eyed fish to the contaminated water to the yellow skin to the nuclear plant. That tissue is simply absent. Cut away. Gone. Which is, the radiation theory would argue, precisely the effect of long-term radiation exposure on a population. Chronic neurological damage, compromised critical thinking. The inability to hold two connected facts in mind long enough to understand that they are connected. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's stay with the skin. The yellow skin of Springfield's residents is not the only physical anomaly worth examining. Look at the hands. Every permanent resident of Springfield has 4 fingers, not 5. 4. The thumb plus 3 fingers. A hand that resembles a cartoon hand more than a human hand, which is again the surface-level explanation. Cartoon characters often have 4 fingers, because 5-fingered hands are difficult and time-consuming to animate. 4 fingers is a production shorthand that goes back to early animation, to the days when every frame was hand-drawn and efficiency was not a luxury, but a necessity. That explanation is also true, and it also fails to account for the same guest character problem. Outsiders, visitors, characters who come from elsewhere are frequently drawn with more naturalistic hands. The 4-finger shorthand does not apply to them in the same consistent way. There is a distinction being made even in the hands between people who are from here and people who are from somewhere else. Now look at the eyes. Homer's eyes bulge. Marge's eyes bulge. Every member of the family, every long-term resident of the town has eyes that sit large and prominent on their faces in a way that does not reflect natural human eye proportions. The eyes are a key part of what makes Simpsons characters instantly recognizable. They are also a feature that is consistently absent in more realistic depictions of outside characters. Then there is Homer's skull. We will spend more time on Homer later, but the shape of his head, that massive, round, almost perfectly spherical cranium, has been the subject of medical curiosity within the fan community for decades. The shape is not consistent with any normal human skull morphology. It is consistent with certain presentations of specific developmental abnormalities. The show's own creator has stated Homer has an IQ of 55, a number that, in formal clinical terms, would place him in a category of significant intellectual disability. His cognitive function is not merely portrayed as low for comic effect. It has been assigned a specific number that implies a specific level of impairment. And the cause of that impairment, the show revealed in a season 12 episode called HOMR, is a crayon. A yellow crayon that Homer pushed up his nose as a child and that migrated through his nasal passage into his brain, where it lodged against the frontal lobe and has been sitting there ever since, physically suppressing the part of his brain responsible for complex thought. How did a crayon get into a child's brain without anyone noticing? How did Homer spend his entire childhood, his adolescence, his adult life, visiting doctors in Springfield, and not a single doctor found a foreign object sitting in his skull? The radiation theory offers an answer. If Springfield's medical establishment is compromised, if the doctors who practice in this town are aware of what the power plant is doing to the population and have been instructed, directly or implicitly, to look the other way, then the crayon is not a mystery. It is a symptom of a system-wide suppression of medical truth. Every doctor in Springfield who examined Homer and did not find the crayon was either spectacularly incompetent or was choosing not to look. In a town owned by a man who profits from the continued operation of a leaking reactor, the difference between incompetence and complicity becomes very small. Let's go back to the skin, because the yellow skin question has a second dimension that most analyses overlook. It is not just that Springfield's residents are yellow. It is that they have been yellow for 36 years and have never aged. The same yellow faces, the same four-fingered hands, the same bulging eyes, frozen in time while the world around them has changed completely. The phones have changed. The cars have changed. The cultural references have changed. The show has moved through decade after decade of American history, absorbing each era's technology and politics and pop culture. But the people have not changed. Not a wrinkle. Not a gray hair. Not a single visible marker of the passage of time. The standard explanation for this is the floating timeline, a storytelling convention used by long-running series to avoid the complications of characters aging in real time. We will spend an entire section on the floating timeline later. But the radiation theory offers a parallel explanation that is, in its own way, more interesting. Radiation affects cellular function. At high enough levels over long enough periods, radiation disrupts the mechanisms by which cells divide, age, and die. Radiation can cause premature aging, yes, but it can also, in specific theoretical conditions, cause cellular stasis, a kind of biological freeze, a state in which the normal processes of aging are overridden by the ongoing, continuous work of the body to manage radiation-induced cellular damage. What if the people of Springfield are not aging because their biology has been so fundamentally altered by decades of radiation exposure that the normal mechanisms of aging no longer apply to them? What if the yellow skin is not a design choice but a symptom? What if the four fingers are not an animation shorthand but a physical indicator of chromosomal disruption in a population that has been marinating in the runoff of a catastrophically mismanaged nuclear facility for 3 generations? What if Springfield is not a cartoon town that looks like a cartoon because it is a cartoon, but a contaminated zone whose residents have mutated to the point where they no longer resemble the people they were descended from? Blinky the three-eyed fish was pulled from a river in Springfield and immediately became national news within the show. A gubernatorial candidate used the fish as evidence that Burns was poisoning the environment. Burns was forced to eat the fish on live television. The town watched. The town shrugged. The town moved on. Nobody tested the water. Nobody commissioned a follow-up study. Nobody asked the obvious question that the three-eyed fish was asking on behalf of every living organism downstream of the plant. If the fish have 3 eyes, what is happening to the people? The show has been answering that question for 36 years. It has been pointing at the answer every single time it shows you a yellow face, a four-fingered hand, a bulging eye, a skull shape that does not fit inside the normal range of human variation. The answer is right there on the surface, which is perhaps why nobody in Springfield can see it. The thing you see every day becomes invisible. The contamination that has shaped every face in town is so ubiquitous, so constant, so woven into the visual fabric of daily life that it stopped registering as contamination long ago. It just looks like Springfield. It just looks like everyone. But it does not look like the people who come from outside. It does not look like the guest characters, the visitors, the outsiders who pass through and then leave. They do not have yellow skin. They do not have 4 fingers. Their skulls are the right shape. Their eyes sit in their faces the way eyes are supposed to sit. They look normal. And the people of Springfield look like Springfield. And Springfield is the only place in the world where anyone looks like that. There is a moment in the Simpsons movie that crystallizes all of this more clearly than any individual episode in the series. When Springfield's environmental contamination reaches a point so extreme, so catastrophically visible that the Environmental Protection Agency, an actual federal agency operating within the show's fictional universe determines that the only solution is to seal the entire town under a giant glass dome. Not to clean it up, not to investigate the source of the contamination, not to hold anyone accountable. To seal it, to contain it, to put a lid on Springfield and leave it there because Springfield is too toxic to be allowed to interact with the rest of the country. The United States government, within the logic of the show's own world, classified Springfield as a contamination zone, the kind of contamination zone that requires physical containment. And the people inside the dome, the yellow-skinned, four-fingered, bulging-eyed residents of a town that their own government has declared too toxic to exist without a lid on it, went about their lives. Panicking, yes. Terrified, absolutely. But within their familiar patterns, within the grooves worn deep by decades of forgetting and resetting and moving on. Because that is what you do when you live inside the contamination. You adapt to it. You normalize it. It becomes the water you swim in, which is fine because the water was already contaminated a long time ago, and you never noticed because the fish with 3 eyes just looks like your fish. The one you have always had. The one you named and love and would miss if it were gone. Springfield is a contamination zone. The residents of Springfield are mutated. The show has been showing you this in every frame of every episode it has ever produced. There is one more piece of the visual argument that deserves its own moment. The safety inspector of the Springfield nuclear power plant is Homer Simpson. We know this. We have established it. We know about the IQ of 55 and the crayon and the 742 documented errors and the deal between Abe and Burns that guarantees Homer's continued employment regardless of performance. But consider the visual dimension of this specifically. Homer's badge, his uniform, his workstation in Sector 7G. These things appear in the show constantly. They are part of the background visual language of Springfield, as familiar as the house on Evergreen Terrace or Moe's Dim Bar or the school building where Principal Skinner stands on the steps. And in every episode where Homer is at work, surrounded by the equipment and the infrastructure of the plant, the same thing is true. Homer is yellow. Homer has 4 fingers. Homer has the eyes and the skull and the skin tone and the physical proportions of a person who has been swimming in this environment for decades. He is the most visually contaminated person in the most visually contaminated building in the most visually contaminated town. And he is the safety inspector. He is the person whose presence and attention and professional judgment is all that stands between the reactor and the population. The man most visibly affected by the thing he is supposed to be protecting people from is the person protecting them from it. This is not subtle. It is drawn in bright yellow on every workstation scene. It is baked into every moment where Homer sits at his console with his donut and his glazed expression and the warning lights that he is not looking at. The visual argument is complete before the dialogue begins. You do not need the IQ number or the crayon revelation or the statistics about violations. You need only to look at Homer Simpson and understand what the colors mean. The yellow skin is not a design choice. It is a diagnosis. Section 3. Homer's Lost Years. The coma, the crayon, the fog. Let us talk about what happened to Homer Simpson. Not the surface version, not the comedy version, the version where a lovable oaf stumbles through his life and somehow always ends up back on the couch by the end of the episode. The deeper version. The version that, once you see it, makes the comedy feel different. Not less funny, exactly. Just different. Weighted. The way a joke told by someone in real pain feels different from a joke told by someone who is perfectly fine. Homer Simpson was damaged before we met him. The show has been building the case for this quietly and persistently across more than 3 decades, and the picture it builds is not a comfortable one. Let us start with the crayon. Season 12, Episode 9. The episode is called HOMR, and it begins with Homer taking part in a medical study for money and discovering something that the study's doctors are astonished he has managed to live with. There is a foreign object in his brain, a crayon. A yellow crayon lodged against his frontal lobe, sitting in the tissue responsible for complex reasoning and abstract thought. The doctors estimate it has been there since Homer was a child, They estimate it has been suppressing his cognitive function for most of his life. They remove it, and Homer is transformed. His IQ climbs immediately. He becomes articulate. He reads books. He engages with complex ideas. He forms logical arguments. He understands things that have always been invisible to him: the architecture of his own life, the systems that shape it, the patterns that a mind working at full capacity can see clearly, and a mind working at 55% simply cannot. He becomes, in the space of a single episode, the person he would have been if the crayon had never been there. And he is miserable. He sees his job clearly for the first time and understands what it means that he has been doing this job for this many years for this little money, with this little satisfaction. He sees his town clearly and understands the ways in which it has been shaped by forces that do not serve the people living in it. He tries to share what he sees with the people around him, and they do not understand, or they do not want to understand, which amounts to the same thing. Lisa is thrilled. Lisa, who has been the most intelligent member of the family for as long as the show has existed, is overjoyed to finally have a father who can match her frequency. They talk, they share ideas, they connect in a way they never have before. And it is not enough. It is not enough to compensate for the weight of seeing clearly in a place that was not designed to be seen clearly. Springfield, when you can actually perceive it, is unbearable. The job, the town, the systems of power that have shaped his life without his knowledge or consent. All of it, visible and undeniable and pressing down on him with a weight that his previous brain simply could not register. So Homer makes a choice. He goes back to the doctor. He has the crayon replaced. He chooses to return to the fog. And the show presents this as a choice he made freely, for comprehensible reasons. Because the alternative, being smart enough to understand how his life was constructed, and by whom and why, was worse than being too limited to understand any of it. The fog is comfortable. The fog is familiar. The fog is, in the specific and particular economy of Homer Simpson's life, a mercy. This is where the show says something true in a way that the comedy format usually prevents it from saying directly. Homer's choice is not unique to Homer. It is not a product of a crayon or a radiation level or a specific clinical diagnosis. It is a choice that people make in various forms in every context where the cost of seeing clearly is higher than the immediate benefit of the clarity. The choice to not fully know the thing you half know. The choice to file the uncomfortable awareness under already thought about that and return to the warmth of the present. The choice to protect the peace at the cost of the truth, because the peace is real and present and warm, and the truth is cold and demanding and doesn't come with any promises about what happens after you accept it. Homer could have kept the crayon out. He could have lived in the clear-eyed version of his life, connected to Lisa in the way that the clarity made possible, awake to the full dimensions of what has been done to him and what he has been complicit in. He chose not to, because awake in Springfield is a specific kind of suffering that his entire history had not equipped him to endure. The damage that built him, the mother's absence, the father's silence, the years of radiation, the decades of work in a facility that was poisoning him, had produced a person whose best available adaptation was the fog. Not because Homer is weak, because the fog was the only tool he had that was equal to the weight he was being asked to carry. And Springfield, the radiation theory argues, was designed precisely to produce that calculation. A town where the costs of clarity are high enough that the reasonable response is the fog. Where the contamination impairs the cognition that would allow someone to see clearly enough to object to the contamination. Where the economy depends on the plant, and the plant depends on Burns, and Burns depends on the impaired population. And the impaired population depends on the jobs and the electricity and the steady structure of a life organized around a facility that is slowly and systematically destroying everyone inside it. Homer put the crayon back and went home to his family. And the family was warm, and the evening was good, and the beer was cold, and in that specific moment, the choice made the only kind of sense that it had ever been available to him to make. But here is the question the show does not ask. How did the crayon get there in the first place? Homer pushed it up his nose as a child. He was a young boy doing what young boys do, pressing objects into orifices they were not designed for. And somehow, Defying what should be the basic mechanical reality of the human skull, the crayon migrated from his nasal passage into his brain, and it stayed there. It stayed there through his entire childhood, through his adolescence, through his courtship with Marge, through the births of his 3 children, through 30-plus years of working in proximity to an active nuclear reactor, through dozens of medical examinations in a town with multiple hospitals and an active medical community. Nobody found it. Nobody found a crayon lodged against the frontal lobe of the man whose job was to stand between the community and a nuclear catastrophe. Either the doctors of Springfield are incompetent beyond any reasonable definition of incompetence, or they found it and said nothing. Either they did not look, or they looked and chose not to tell him. Either the medical establishment of Springfield is extraordinarily bad at its job, or the medical establishment of Springfield is complicit in maintaining a population that cannot think clearly enough to ask difficult questions. In a town owned by the man who needs that population to remain incurious, the second explanation is the one that fits. Now, the coma. April 1st, 1993, Season 4, Episode 18. The episode is titled, So It's Come to This, a Simpsons Clip Show. The premise is exactly what the title suggests. A clip show built around a framing device in which Bart plays a series of escalating April Fool's pranks on Homer. The pranks culminate in Bart taking one of Homer's beer cans to an auto body shop and placing it in an industrial paint shaker. The can is shaken until the pressure inside it is catastrophic, then returned to the refrigerator. When Homer opens it, the explosion is violent enough to send him to the hospital. This part is already the show doing something slightly unusual, allowing a prank to have real consequences, something the show's episodic structure typically resists. But it gets more unusual. While Homer is in the hospital recovering, he sees a vending machine across the room. He wants a candy bar. He reaches for it. The machine tips. The machine falls. The machine lands on Homer, and Homer flatlines. He enters a coma. A genuine, clinically established, not played for laughs coma that lasts for 7 weeks. The episode ends, apparently, with Homer waking up. Bart, in tears, confesses at his father's bedside that the whole thing was his fault. Homer springs awake and immediately begins strangling his son. The family laughs. Everything returns to normal. But in the final moments of the episode, a detail is dropped and then abandoned with the casualness of someone leaving a book on a park bench. The doctors inform Homer that the coma has permanently destroyed 5% of his brain function. Gone. Irretrievable. He will never get it back. Homer laughs. He says he does not know why he is laughing. The family finds this endearing. The show moves on. The fan theory that has built up around this moment is called the Homer coma theory, and it is, by almost any measure, the most discussed, most debated, most internally consistent theory in the history of the Simpsons fandom. Originally proposed online, the premise is simple and devastating. Homer did not wake up. Everything that has aired since April 1st, 1993, every storyline, every character development, every guest appearance, every impossible event, every couch gag, every reset, is a dream being generated inside the mind of a man lying in a hospital bed in Springfield General, slowly losing brain function while his family sits beside him and waits for him to open his eyes. The evidence for this theory is genuinely difficult to dismiss. Start with the tonal shift. Before the coma episode, The Simpsons was a different show. Not unrecognizably different. It was always funny, always sharp, always willing to go further than most family-oriented programming. But it was grounded in a way that the later show simply is not. The early seasons dealt with recognizable human problems. Homer tries to get a better job and fails. Marge considers whether she is happy and concludes, cautiously, that she is. Lisa develops a crush on a substitute teacher and learns something painful about the nature of admiration. Bart struggles academically and faces the possibility that his failures might have real, lasting consequences. These are everyday problems. Financial stress, marital tension, academic failure, the slow grinding difficulty of being a family that loves each other and keeps getting in each other's way. The show's comedy was rooted in recognition. You watched it and you saw something true about human life, and you laughed because it was true. After the coma, the show changes. The change is gradual at first, then rapid, then irreversible. Homer goes to space. Mr. Burns captures the Loch Ness Monster. Homer discovers a secret society of men who have controlled Springfield's civic life for generations. Homer meets God. Not metaphorically, he has actual face-to-face conversations with the divine on multiple occasions. Homer travels the world. Homer holds hundreds of different jobs, each one forgotten by the next episode. The show graduates from domestic satire to cosmic absurdism, and the escalation tracks almost perfectly with the coma theory's timeline. A dreaming brain, generating simulations from fragmentary memory, cannot maintain the kind of grounded specificity that the show had in its early seasons. The early Simpsons feels the way a memory feels: detailed, emotionally resonant, anchored in the texture of real experience. The later Simpsons feels the way a dream feels: vivid, strange, unbound by the logic of cause and effect, capable of anything, resistant to consequence. Now consider the aging problem. Nobody in Springfield ages. This is, from a production standpoint, simply a feature of the floating timeline, the convention used by long-running animated shows that allows the present to always be the present without the characters growing older. We have acknowledged this, and we will examine it in detail later. But the coma theory has an answer for it that is both simpler and more affecting than any other explanation on offer. Nobody ages because they exist inside the mind of a man who went unconscious in April 1993 and has not woken up since. Of course, Bart is still 10. Homer's unconscious brain cannot imagine Bart growing up because Homer was not there to see it happen. Of course, Marge looks the same as she did the last day Homer was conscious. Of course, Lisa is still 8, still playing her saxophone, still fighting the same battles against the same indifference. The dream preserves them at the last moment Homer experienced them, because that is what memory does, and that is what dreams do with memory. They freeze the people you love at the point of loss and hold them there, warm and present and not yet gone. Homer's coma dream is not a nightmare. It is the dream of a man who is terrified of losing his family. It is the dream of a man whose deepest, simplest, most unconditional wish is to go home. To sit on the couch, to have Marge beside him and Bart doing something that will require intervention, and Lisa practicing in her room, and Maggie sitting in her high chair looking at the world with those enormous, knowing eyes. That is all Homer wants. It is such a small thing. It is the kind of thing that only becomes visible as a wish when you are about to lose it, when you are lying in a hospital bed with 5% of your brain function gone and no guarantee of more. So the dream gives it to him, over and over and over. Every episode, every reset, every return to the couch and the television, and the life that never changes because it cannot change. Because change in this context means acknowledging that time has passed by, that the world went on without him, that the children he is dreaming about are older now, or not, that the worst possibility, the one the dream is most urgently designed to prevent him from confronting, is also possible. 6 months before the coma episode, in the season 4 premiere, an episode called Homer the Heretic, Homer has a conversation with God. An actual face-to-face conversation. Homer sitting in his living room in a dream sequence, speaking with a divine presence that has a voice and a face and takes Homer's questions seriously. And during this conversation, God tells Homer something that the coma theory turns from a throwaway theological joke into a prophecy. God tells Homer that he will learn the meaning of life. But not yet. His time is coming, but it is not now. 6 months later, Homer is in a coma. God was not being reassuring. God was being precise. Homer's time was coming. Homer's conscious experience of life was approaching its end. And the 6 months between that conversation and the vending machine falling was the last stretch of unambiguous reality Homer Simpson would ever experience. Everything after that is the dream. Now, the celebrity appearances. In the early seasons, celebrity guest appearances on The Simpsons were events. They were notable. They were discussed. When Michael Jackson appeared in season 3, uncredited, playing a character named Leon Kompowski who claimed to be Michael Jackson, it was a cultural moment. When Dustin Hoffman appeared, also uncredited, it was talked about. These were rare and significant occasions. After the coma, or rather, after the point where the coma theory says Homer lost consciousness, the celebrity appearances multiply dramatically. Season after season, more and more famous faces appear in Springfield. Musicians, athletes, politicians, actors, scientists, historical figures depicted in imagination sequences. The parade of celebrity cameos becomes so dense in later seasons that it effectively becomes a defining characteristic of the show. The coma theory has a precise explanation for this. Homer's brain, lying unconscious in a hospital bed, is receiving ambient sensory input from the world around him. The television in the hospital room, conversations at his bedside, the radio perhaps, voices and names and cultural references drifting in through the fog of unconsciousness and being absorbed by a dreaming mind, incorporated into the simulation, rendered as characters who show up in Springfield and interact with the family. Every celebrity who appears in the post-coma Simpsons is, according to this reading, a voice Homer heard through the haze of unconsciousness, a name his family mentioned at his bedside, a face he absorbed from a television set playing in the background of the room where his body lies. His dreaming brain translates these fragments into dream characters, populates Springfield with them, gives them storylines and dialogue and purposes within the narrative. Because that is what a dreaming brain does with the information it receives. It makes stories out of fragments. It creates coherence where there is only noise. The show itself has acknowledged this theory. In a relatively recent season, a fake deleted scene was prepared and apparently leaked, showing Homer waking from a coma and revealing that the entire run of the show had been a dream. The scene was later described as a deliberate hoax planted to acknowledge the theory's existence without confirming it. The show's producers created the scene. They animated it. They showed Homer waking up. And then they said it was fake. They showed you the answer, and then they took it back. Executive producer Al Jean addressed the theory in 2015. He said it was not true. He said it was fan speculation and the show was not going to validate it. He did not explain why nobody ages. He did not explain the tonal shift. He did not address the God conversation from Homer the heretic. He did not engage with the specific evidence. He simply said it was not true, and that was that. But the theory did not go away. Because the theory does something that no official explanation has ever managed to do. It makes the show make sense. All of it. The aging freeze, the reset button, the escalating absurdity, the survivability, the celebrity flood, the way consequences evaporate between episodes as though they never happened, the way catastrophic events leave no lasting mark, the way Springfield perpetually returns to baseline regardless of what it has just been through. If the simulation is running inside a deteriorating brain, all of these features are expected. A brain that is slowly losing function cannot maintain consistent physics, cannot hold consequences across episodes, cannot age its characters in real time because the brain has no real-time experience to draw on but not AI. It is locked in the last moment before consciousness ended, cycling through variations of a life it can no longer reach. And the emotional core of the theory, the part that stays with you. Homer's deepest, simplest wish, the one his dreaming brain is spending its diminishing energy to fulfill, is not complicated. He wants his family. He wants Marge to still love him. He wants Bart to still be his mischievous, impossible, infuriating, beloved boy. He wants Lisa to still be there with her saxophone and her too big heart. He wants Maggie to be small enough to hold. He wants Friday evening at the house on Evergreen Terrace to last forever, with the television on and everyone home and nowhere else to be. And in the coma, it does last forever. The dream gives him the only heaven a man like Homer Simpson would ever ask for. A house where the kids are always young. A wife who always comes home. A life that never ends. That is the coma theory. And the reason it has never gone away and will never go away is not because it is provably true. It is because it is beautiful. It is because it reframes every single episode of the show, from the earliest grounded domestic comedies to the most gonzo later season absurdism. As chapters in a love letter from an unconscious father to the family he is dreaming about because they are the only thing worth dreaming about. The show will never confirm this, but it will never disprove it either, because the evidence is not in any single episode. It is in the structure of the show itself. In the things the show keeps doing, season after season, that only makes sense if you accept the premise that the story is being told from inside a dream. Homer is still in that hospital bed, and every episode you have ever watched is him refusing to wake up. Because waking up means finding out how much time has really passed. And some things, once you know them, cannot be unknown. There is one more thing about the coma theory that belongs here. Something that the Reddit threads and the fan analyses tend not to spend time with, because it requires sitting in an uncomfortable place for longer than the standard treatment of the theory usually allows. If Homer is dreaming, and if the dream is generated from the last memories his conscious mind recorded before the vending machine fell, then the dream is not just a passive replay of things that happened. It is an active construction. Homer's unconscious mind is not running a recording. It is running a simulation, taking the raw material of his last conscious experience of the world and his family and his life, and generating variations, possibilities, episodes. It is telling stories. His dreaming brain is telling stories about the people he loves, using everything it knows about them as source material, running scenario after scenario to keep them alive and present and reachable. Every time Homer survives something impossible, it is the dream refusing to let the story where Homer is gone be the story. Every time the family reunites at the end of an episode, it is the deep wish for reunion being enacted in the only theater available. Every time the credits roll and everything goes back to normal, it is the dreaming mind resetting for another episode because the dreaming mind has not yet done everything it needs to do with these people. This means that 36 seasons of The Simpsons is also 36 seasons of a man's unconscious love for his family made visible. Every episode is a chapter in what his mind does when left alone with the people it loves most, the adventures it imagines them having, the crises it invents and resolves, the thousand small moments of comedy and tenderness and infuriating incompetence that constitute the texture of a life lived alongside these specific people. The show is not just a show. If the coma theory is true, the show is Homer's mind doing the only thing it can do with what it was given. Loving them, in the only way left to it, in the dark. Let us talk about the oldest man in Springfield, Charles Montgomery. Plantagenet Schicklgruber Burns. Monty, to the few people who would dare the familiarity. Mr. Burns, to everyone else. Sir, to Smithers. He is the richest man in Springfield. He is likely the richest man in the state. He may be among the richest men in the country. His wealth is old in a way that most American wealth is not. It does not trace to a tech company founded in a garage, or an oil strike, or a single inspired gamble in the right industry at the right moment. The Burns fortune predates the Industrial Revolution. The Burns family has been accumulating power for so long that the mechanisms of accumulation are no longer visible. The money simply exists, the way rivers exist. Not because someone made them, but because the landscape of the world shaped itself around them over a period of time too long to meaningfully imagine. Burns owns the nuclear power plant. He owns considerable portions of Springfield's commercial real estate. He has, at various points in the show's run, owned the media, influenced the judiciary, controlled the municipal government, and manipulated the police department with the casual ease of a man who has been doing these things for so long that he has stopped needing to think about them. He has a personal physician. He has a pharmaceutical division capable of synthesizing experimental medical treatments. He has the kind of institutional power that is invisible precisely because it is everywhere, so woven into the fabric of the town's infrastructure that challenging it would require dismantling the infrastructure itself. He is, according to the most conservative estimate derived from the show's own canon, somewhere between 100 and 140 years old. He remembers the Spanish-American War as a personal memory, not a historical reference. He attended Yale. He served in World War II in a capacity the show describes with deliberate ambiguity, suggesting involvement in activities that the post-war world found easier not to prosecute than to examine closely. He knew Howard Hughes. He has referenced events from the Gilded Age not as history but as lived experience. the way older people speak about things that happened when they were young. Not with the cadences of someone reciting dates from a textbook, but with the specific texture of someone who was actually there. How is he still alive? The show addresses this question directly, and the answer it provides is simultaneously played for comedy and genuinely terrifying. In the season 8 episode known as the Springfield Files, Homer encounters what he believes is an alien in the woods outside town. The episode parodies the X-Files format, bringing in FBI agents Mulder and Scully to investigate, and builds to a dramatic reveal. The alien, the glowing figure that Homer saw stumbling through the trees, the green luminescent presence that sent the town into a spiral of alien invasion panic, is not an alien. It is Burns. Burns has been undergoing weekly medical treatments so intensive, so loaded with synthesized chemicals and controlled radiation, that they cause his entire body to emit a visible green glow. The treatments keep him alive for exactly 7 more days. Without them, he will die. And after 7 days, he needs another treatment, and another after that, and the cycle repeats. Week after week, year after year, a biological maintenance schedule so precise and so non-negotiable that missing a single appointment is not an inconvenience, but a death sentence. Burns is not surviving through natural biological processes. His body cannot sustain itself without external intervention. He is, in the most clinical sense possible, a medical impossibility being maintained through scheduled servicing. He is less a living person than a very old, very complex machine that requires weekly calibration to keep running. And the treatment, crucially, involves radiation. The man who owns a nuclear power plant, whose facility has been leaking radioactive material into Springfield's environment for decades, whose physical presence is marked by yellow skin and the specific otherworldly glow that radiation exposure at extreme levels can produce in biological tissue. This man is personally dependent on controlled radiation exposure to sustain his own cellular function. He is not just profiting from radiation, he is powered by it. His body has been so fundamentally altered by more than a century of proximity to nuclear material, first from whatever sources of radioactive exposure existed in the early 20th century, then from his own power plant, that it can no longer sustain itself through normal cellular metabolism. It requires external radiation input the way a normal organism requires food and water. The radiation is not killing him slowly. The radiation is the only reason he is not already dead. This is, from a biological standpoint, not how radiation works. Radiation does not become a life-sustaining force through exposure and adaptation. It destroys. It mutates. It kills, slowly or quickly depending on dosage, but it does not, in any real medical sense, become fuel. Except in Springfield, where the normal rules have been bending for 36 years, and where the most extreme mutations, a three-eyed fish, a man who survived 7 weeks in a coma and lost 5% of his brain function and came back laughing, a baby with off-the-charts intelligence who has not spoken a meaningful word in 3 decades, are not outliers, but the norm. Burns's relationship with radiation is the logical endpoint of everything the radiation theory predicts about Springfield's population. If long-term radiation exposure can turn a young Homer Simpson into the cognitively impaired man we know, then long-term radiation exposure at even higher levels over an even longer period, managed by a man with the resources and knowledge to control the dosage precisely, might produce something even stranger. Not death, or even the slow deterioration that uncontrolled radiation inevitably brings. Something more like transformation, a body that has adapted to radiation as its operating environment. A biology that has been so completely restructured by radiation's effects that removing the radiation would be as fatal as removing the air from a normal person's lungs. Burns is the most extreme example of what Springfield's radiation does. The most extreme and the best managed, because Burns is the only person in town with the resources to manage it. Everyone else in Springfield is exposed to whatever leaks from the plant's cracked cooling towers and contaminated water supply, unable to control the dose, unable to mitigate the effects, unable to afford the kind of medical intervention that keeps Burns ambulatory and sharp. They get the radiation. He gets the treatments. He gets the counterweights. There is also the matter of Burns's diseases. In one of the most famous scenes in the series, famous enough to have generated the medical term Three Stooges syndrome, which does not actually exist in real medical literature but which the internet has enthusiastically adopted anyway. Burns visits a doctor who delivers extraordinary news. Burns does not have one disease or two diseases or a manageable collection of conditions. Burns has every disease. Every single disease known to medical science is present in his body simultaneously. Every pathogen, every cancer, every degenerative condition, every parasitic infection, all of them coexisting in the same host. The doctor's explanation for how this is possible is as follows. The diseases are present in such equal concentration and number that they create a state of biological gridlock. Each disease is blocked by every other disease. None of them can progress to the stage of killing Burns because all of them are competing for the same cellular resources, and none of them can gain the dominance necessary to succeed. Burns is the sickest man in the United States, and he is therefore functionally indestructible because everything that should kill him is simultaneously preventing everything else from killing him. The doctor calls it Three Stooges syndrome. Three things trying to fit through a door at once and none of them getting through. It is played for laughs. It is a great joke. It is also, under the radiation theory, a description of something that is not random at all but deliberately engineered. Burns's diseases are not in equilibrium by accident. They are in equilibrium because the weekly treatments maintain that equilibrium. The treatments do not cure the diseases. They manage them. They keep every pathogen, every cancer cell, every degenerative process in a state of precise stasis, balanced against every other pathogen and cancer cell and degenerative process in a calibration so exquisitely maintained that the system is self-sustaining as long as the treatments continue. Remove the treatments and the equilibrium collapses. Every disease surges forward simultaneously. Every illness that has been held in stasis breaks free at once, and Burns dies. Not slowly, not of old age, but catastrophically. Every disease he has ever harbored, all killing him at the same time. Smithers is Burns's assistant. He is, by any reasonable accounting, the most devoted employee in the history of employment. He manages Burns's schedule. He monitors Burns's physical condition. He attends to Burns's needs with a vigilance that goes significantly beyond any professional obligation, and that the show has repeatedly coded, with varying degrees of subtlety, as romantic obsession. But the radiation theory suggests that Smithers' devotion has a practical dimension that the romance framing tends to obscure. Without Smithers, Burns misses treatments. Without treatments, Burns dies. Smithers is not just devoted to Burns because he loves him in whatever complicated way the show implies he does. Smithers is devoted to Burns because Smithers understands, perhaps better than anyone else alive, what the treatments are for and what happens if they stop. Smithers is the keeper of the machine that keeps Burns running, and Smithers knows that if he walks away, the machine stops. This is the foundation of their relationship. Not just love, not just loyalty, not just the complicated emotional entanglement of a man and his employer that the show has milked for 36 years of quietly devastating comedy. Functional necessity. Smithers knows that his presence is what stands between Burns and death. And Burns, for all his cruelty and dismissiveness and genuine inability to care about Smithers as a person in any consistent or meaningful way, keeps Smithers close because he has no other option. The alternative is dying. Now consider what this means in the context of the larger conspiracy that the radiation theory describes. Burns knows what his plant is doing to Springfield. He has always known. His weekly treatments are proof that he understands exactly what radiation does to biological systems, because he has been managing the effects of radiation on his own body for over a century. He understands the mechanism of contamination. He understands the downstream effects. He understands that the people of Springfield are experiencing a degraded version of what he experiences. The same radiation, without the resources to manage it, without the treatments that keep the diseases in equilibrium, without the pharmaceutical support that prevents the cellular damage from accumulating past the point of function. He knows this. And he keeps the plant running. He keeps the safety violations unremediated. He keeps Homer in Sector 7G. He keeps the water contaminated and the air irradiated, and the cracked cooling towers patched with chewing gum and the luminous rats scurrying through the bowels of the facility. He keeps all of it running because the alternative, fixing it, cleaning it up, complying with the 342 violations the safety inspection identified, would mean admitting that the plant has been doing this for decades. And admitting that would mean someone might start asking questions about what those decades of contamination have already done to the people who live downwind. Burns is not incidentally aware of the damage his plant has caused. Burns is the damage. He is the most extreme, the most visible, the most physically transformed product of Springfield's nuclear environment. He is what happens when a person with virtually unlimited resources survives a century of radioactive exposure. He is the final form of what the radiation does, ancient beyond the biological possibility of age, held alive by weekly maintenance, his diseases in precarious equilibrium, his body glowing with the radiation that sustains him, his mind razor-sharp and ruthless and absolutely clear-eyed about the system he has built and what it costs the people who live inside it. And Homer works for him. Homer, whose crayon-impaired brain cannot connect the name of his employer to the story of his mother's exile, cannot see the architecture of the system that shaped him, cannot comprehend that the man who signs his paycheck is the man who stole his childhood. Homer shows up every day, puts his badge on, sits down at his workstation, and does his job, or fails to do his job, which in the specific economy of this system amounts to the same thing. Burns did not hire Homer by accident. He hired Homer by design. A competent safety inspector would shut the plant down within a week. Homer ensures the violations continue. The radiation keeps leaking. The population remains impaired. The economy remains dependent on the plant's operation. And Burns maintains his monopoly over the one thing that every resident of Springfield cannot live without: the power to keep the lights on. He is not the richest man in Springfield by luck or by talent alone, though he has both. He is the richest man in Springfield because he built a system that cannot be dismantled without dismantling the town itself. And he is still alive 36 years into the show's run, still glowing, still running on his weekly treatments, still incapable of remembering Homer's name, still running the plant that poisons the population that cannot afford to challenge him, because the system he built was not designed to produce a challenger. It was designed to produce Homer. And it worked. But let us not close the Burns section without sitting with the full weight of what Burns represents, because the show has done something unusual with this character across 36 years. It has maintained him as a villain, clear, deliberate, self-aware, without ever softening him into something more complex, without ever providing the redemptive arc that most long-running villains eventually receive, because audiences and writers both grow tired of pure darkness after long enough. Burns has not been redeemed. Burns has not had a season where we understood him better and felt more sympathy for him. Burns has had moments where his humanity has been briefly visible. His attachment to a stuffed bear, his occasional genuine feeling for Smithers, the specific loneliness of a man who has outlived every person who ever knew him before he became what he is now. But these moments are presented as anomalies, as gaps in the armor rather than as the true self underneath it. The show insists that Burns is what he appears to be, not a misunderstood man, not a person whose circumstances explain and somewhat excuse his behavior. A man who chose, repeatedly and with full understanding of the consequences, to prioritize the continuation of his empire over the health and freedom and potential of every person whose life that empire consumed. This insistence is rare in American popular culture, which tends to humanize its villains because humanizing is more emotionally satisfying than the alternative. The alternative, acknowledging that some people with enough power and enough distance from the consequences of their choices will simply continue making those choices indefinitely without remorse, is not emotionally satisfying. It is uncomfortable. It does not resolve into a teachable moment or a redemption arc or a narrative of justice served. Burns does not get justice served. Burns gets his weekly treatments and his impeccable wardrobe and his view from the highest point in Springfield and another week, and then another, and then another. The show presents this not as a failure of narrative justice, but as an accurate description of how unchecked power actually behaves. Not with dramatic cruelty, not with mustache twirling, with the quiet, methodical, institutionalized persistence of a man who built a system that does not require him to personally harm anyone because the system does the harm on his behalf. automatically, as a byproduct of its ordinary operation. Burns does not need to personally contaminate Springfield's water. The plant does it. Burns does not need to personally suppress Homer's intelligence. The crayon did it, and the radiation did it, and the absence of Mona Simpson did it, and the deal with Abe sealed it. Burns does not need to personally prevent the population from challenging his power. The impairment does it. The denial does it. The collective social contract that makes inconvenient truths illegal does it. He just keeps the plant running. The rest takes care of itself. That is what unchecked, generational, institutionalized power actually looks like when it is depicted honestly. Not a dramatic villain. A system. A machine that runs on the labor and the compliance and the cognitive limitation of the people it is built on, generating wealth for the one person at the top while distributing the costs of that wealth generation across everyone else. Burns is the machine. Springfield is what the machine produces. And it has been producing it, uninterrupted and unaccountable since before the show began. The date is May 21st, 1995. The Simpsons had been on the air for 5.5 seasons. It was, by any measure, the most popular animated show in television history. And on that night, the show did something that had never been done by an animated series before, and arguably has not been done as effectively since. It created a genuine mystery. Season 6, Episode 25. Who Shot Mr. Burns? Part 1. The episode opens on Springfield Elementary, which has struck oil beneath the school's property. A sudden, absurd windfall that briefly suggests the possibility of actual, sustained funding for a school that has operated for decades in a state of cheerful institutional decay. Music programs could be signed, new facilities could be built, teachers could be paid something approaching a living wage. Burns destroys it. He orders his people to drill diagonally from the power plant's property, redirecting the oil flow away from the school and into his own reserves. The school loses the oil before it has banked $1 of it. The music program is cut, Principal Skinner is crushed, and Burns, flush with this new acquisition, begins the next phase of a plan he has apparently been developing for some time: the construction of a giant mechanical disc capable of blocking the sun over the entire town of Springfield. Not partially blocking it, eliminating direct sunlight from the entire municipality so that every resident is forced to use artificial lighting that can only come from the power plant, and that every business, every home, every school and hospital and bar and church in Springfield becomes permanently dependent on Burns's electricity supply in a way that not even the existing monopoly has achieved. He builds the device, he activates it. Springfield goes dark, and before the episode ends, before the screen cuts to black on the summer cliffhanger that held America in suspense for 4 months, Mr. Burns is shot. He staggers to the town's sundial, his blood staining the stone, his hands coming to rest on 2 specific letters as he loses consciousness and falls. The letters are W and S, or, from Burns's perspective as he faces inward, M and S. America had a summer to figure out who pulled the trigger. Fox promoted it like a cultural event. America's Most Wanted produced a tie-in special. A national contest invited viewers to submit their guesses, with the winner to be animated into a future episode. The Simpsons was not just a television show that summer. It was a puzzle. It was the conversation. When Part 2 aired in September 1995, the investigation played out as a comedic procedural. Smithers confessed immediately, but his confession dissolved when it turned out he had been blackout drunk at the time of the shooting and had actually shot Jasper's wooden leg. Not Burns. A different person. A different limb. The wrong crime. Suspects were eliminated one by one. Alibis were established. DNA evidence pointed to Homer. His fingerprints were on the gun, his eyelash was found on Burns's suit, and his motive was clear. Burns had never once remembered his name in 30-plus years of employment, a slight that had driven Homer to an increasingly visible breaking point. Homer was arrested. He was about to be convicted. Then Burns woke up from his coma. He looked around the hospital room. He identified his shooter. It was Maggie Simpson. According to Burns's account, he had encountered the baby in the parking lot after the public meeting. He had attempted to take her lollipop. In the struggle, his gun, which he carried in a holster that had already been shown earlier in the episode to be empty, suggesting the gun was missing before the shooting, had fallen. Maggie picked it up. The gun discharged. Burns was shot. Case closed. Baby did it. Chief Wiggum noted that no jury in the world would convict a baby. The family went home. The screen cut to black on the final image of Maggie alone in the room, checking carefully to make sure no one was watching, and then moving her pacifier in a motion that mimicked pulling a trigger. And everyone accepted it mostly. Because the show said so. Because the baby did it, and babies can't be prosecuted, and besides, the answer was funny. A 1-year-old as the shooter of the town's most powerful man. There is a satisfying absurdity to it that makes the comedy part of the show's brain reluctant to push past it. But the evidence does not fully support it. Let us start with the contest that nobody won. Fox invited viewers across America to submit their guesses for the shooter. The prize was significant and specific. The winner would be animated into a future episode. Thousands of entries were received. According to the DVD commentary for the episode, from the randomly selected sample of submitted guesses that were reviewed, not a single person correctly identified Maggie as the shooter. Nobody won. The person awarded the prize was chosen randomly. Since they had not guessed correctly, they received a cash payment instead of being animated into the show. The producers noted on the commentary that they were aware of exactly one person who had posted the correct answer on a Simpsons online forum on the night of the original broadcast. But this person was using a college internet account, and by the time the contest concluded and producers tried to track them down, the account was no longer active. They issued an open invitation on the DVD release for that person to come forward. As far as anyone knows, they never did. Think about what that means. The show's creators designed a mystery. They told the public it was solvable from the clues presented in Part 1. They built a national contest around it and promoted it as a cultural event. And when the answer was revealed, essentially nobody had figured it out. Either the clues were insufficient, the red herrings were too effective, or the answer did not logically follow from the evidence in the way the show claimed it did. Now consider the sundial. Burns collapses onto the sundial. His hands come to rest on W and S. From his own perspective, facing inward, M and S. The show presents this as pointing to Maggie Simpson, and Burns himself, in his hospital bed, confirms that this is the shooter's identity. But here's the problem. Burns also states, canonically on the record, that his hands pointing at those letters was not intentional. He did not deliberately position himself to spell out the initials of his attacker. He fell. He lost consciousness. He was not arranging himself to leave a clue. He just fell. The central piece of evidence that the show uses to justify its answer, the sundial, was explicitly described by the victim as a coincidence. The biggest mystery in the show's history was solved by a clue that the person it supposedly came from said was meaningless. Then there is the gun itself. Burns carried his weapon in a holster. The episode clearly shows, in the moments before the shooting, that the holster is empty. The gun was already missing from Burns's person before the attack. Whoever shot Burns used his own weapon, a weapon that was absent from his holster before the shooting took place, which means the shooter obtained Burns's gun at some point before the confrontation and used it against him. This detail matters. It means the shooting was not entirely spontaneous. Someone had Burns's gun. Whether they took it deliberately or found it by chance, the fact that Burns's holster was empty before the shooting means the gun was somewhere other than on Burns's person prior to the attack. A baby finding a gun on the ground fits this profile. So do at least a dozen other characters who were present at the town meeting and who were not carrying their own weapons. The gun clue does not point to Maggie specifically. It points to anyone who is unarmed and who found or obtained the weapon before using it. Now consider Burns's words when he first saw his shooter. The show depicts him saying, in the moments before he was shot, "Oh, it's you." He recognized his attacker. He was not startled. He was not afraid. He addressed them with the calm familiarity of someone acknowledging a person they know. The way you might greet an acquaintance you run into unexpectedly. Not surprised, not threatened, just registering their presence. Does Burns know Maggie Simpson in a way that would prompt that response? Has he ever had a meaningful interaction with Homer and Marge's youngest child prior to this episode? The show does not establish a relationship between Burns and Maggie before the shooting. Burns barely recognizes Homer, the man who has worked for him for more than 3 decades. The idea that he would look at a baby and say, "Oh, it's you," with the tone of someone greeting a familiar acquaintance does not track. But there are characters in the show who would prompt exactly that response from Burns. Characters he knows well. Characters whose presence in a parking lot near the sundial, alone with him after the public meeting, would not alarm him. Characters he would address with casual recognition. In season 18, Homer confesses, he says in what appears to be a throwaway line that the show gives no significant weight that he was the one who shot Burns. He just says it. On camera. In front of other characters. And nobody reacts. Nobody reopens the case. Nobody investigates. The man who was arrested and very nearly convicted for this crime makes an apparent confession, and it is treated as a joke. Either Homer is lying for attention, which is consistent with his character and entirely possible, or the original verdict was wrong and Homer knows it because he was there. And the reason nobody takes the confession seriously is that the official verdict has been filed away in Springfield's institutional memory, and Burns is alive and the case is closed, and nobody in this town reopens closed cases. Not the kind that powerful men have an interest in keeping closed. The most compelling alternative theory comes from a reading of the episode that focuses on Marge. Consider her position. By the time of the shooting, Burns has stolen the oil that should have funded her children's school. Burns has injured Santa's little helper, the family dog. Burns has stolen the sun from the entire town, a move so aggressive, so contemptuous of every person in Springfield, that it amounts to a declaration of total dominion over the town's basic survival conditions. Burns has fired Smithers for raising an ethical objection, demonstrating that even the one person in his orbit who might restrain his worst impulses has been removed. Marge is a devoted mother. She is the person in the Simpson family who has absorbed the most damage from Burns's actions over the years while having the least direct power to respond to any of it. And she has, in at least one notable episode, been the object of Burns's genuine romantic interest, an infatuation that Burns pursued with his characteristic combination of self-absorption and actual feeling. If Burns saw Marge in the parking lot after the meeting, his response would be, "Oh, it's you." Not alarmed, not threatened, possibly even pleased. And if Burns loved Marge in whatever cold and eccentric and imperfectly human way Burns is capable of love, the explanation for why he did not identify her as the shooter becomes suddenly much cleaner. He woke up from the coma. He knew who had shot him. He looked at the sundial and said, "Maggie Simpson," because Maggie Simpson is 2 years old and cannot be prosecuted. He chose a fall person who could not be convicted. He protected the real shooter. He took the bullet and the secret with him. Maggie's final shot in the episode is ambiguous by design. She mimics pulling a trigger with her pacifier. This could mean she is the shooter, celebrating privately. It could mean she witnessed the shooting and is reenacting something she saw. It could be the show winking at the audience, giving both readings simultaneous support, declining to fully commit because the ambiguity is more interesting than any definitive answer. There is also the alternate ending. A complete, fully animated, fully voiced alternative conclusion was produced in which Smithers is the shooter. Not a sketch or a rough outline. A finished production, long enough to fill the slot occupied by the Maggie reveal. This ending was screened in The Simpsons' 138th episode special, where it was dismissed by the episode's host as not making sense because the DNA evidence pointed to a Simpson. The host's dismissal included a reference to the O.J. Simpson trial, specifically to the jury's decision to disregard DNA evidence, and the joke runs as follows. Ignoring DNA evidence would be downright nutty. The show is winking at you. It is citing the most famous recent example of a case where a jury disregarded physical evidence to reach a conclusion that the evidence did not fully support. It is telling you, through the specific reference it chose, that ignoring DNA evidence is something that happens in high-profile cases. It is telling you that the official answer is not necessarily the right answer, and that the evidence can be made to point wherever the people in power want it to point. An early draft of the script had Barney Gumble as the shooter. The writers seriously considered this option and planned to send Barney to prison before abandoning the idea. What this means is that the answer was not determined in advance by the clues planted in the episode. The clues were adjusted to fit whatever answer the writers eventually chose. The mystery was reverse engineered. The evidence was shaped to match the conclusion, not the conclusion derived from the evidence. Which is, the show knows exactly how many real-world criminal investigations work. The official answer is Maggie Simpson. The show committed to it. The writers stand behind it. The DVD commentary treats it as settled. But the contest nobody won. The clue Burns said was a coincidence. The gun that was missing before the attack? The "oh, it's you" that presupposes familiarity. Homer's unexamined Season 18 confession? And the final shot of Maggie reenacting the trigger pull in an empty room. All of it suggests that the greatest mystery in Simpsons history was never actually solved. It was closed. And in Springfield, closing a case and solving a case have never been the same operation. Closing a case means arriving at an official answer that is sufficient to prevent further investigation. Solving a case means arriving at the truth. Springfield's institutional infrastructure, the police department that Wiggum runs, with his characteristic combination of confidence and incompetence, the judiciary that issues legally binding decrees against speaking inconvenient truths, the civic memory that resets between episodes, is very good at the former and constitutionally uninterested in the latter. The case was closed because it needed to be closed. Burns survived. The shooter needed to be identified in a way that produced no prosecutable consequences. The evidence needed to be interpreted in a way that served the town's need for resolution without disturbing the town's settled power structures. A baby cannot be prosecuted. A baby cannot be interrogated. A baby cannot be turned, through the pressure of investigation, into a source of information about who else was in that parking lot and what they saw and who they might have been protecting. Whether Maggie pulled the trigger or not, she was the ideal official answer. And Burns, the most strategically intelligent person in Springfield, a man who has been navigating the gap between official stories and actual truths for over a century, understood this. He looked at the available options for how this moment could resolve and chose the one that closed the case with the minimum disruption to the system that keeps him alive and powerful and in control. The greatest mystery in the history of animated television was not solved by evidence or truth. It was closed by convenience. And in Springfield, that has always been enough. The smartest person in in Springfield. Let us talk about the baby, not about the shooting specifically. We have already been there, and we will return before the night is over. Let us talk about what exists behind those enormous, wide-set eyes that the show has been pointing at for 36 years, while everyone, including the characters, looks somewhere else. Maggie Simpson is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old since December 17, 1989. She communicates through pacifier sounds and facial expressions, and the occasional strategic deployment of her gaze, which is, for a child who cannot speak, remarkably precise. She falls down frequently. She cannot walk without the constant risk of toppling. She requires care at a level that consumes a non-trivial portion of her family's daily energy. She is, to outward appearances, everything a 1 year old is. Small, dependent, largely nonverbal, existing in the world primarily as a recipient of love and attention rather than a generator of action. This is the most effective disguise in Springfield. Because Maggie Simpson is not what she appears to be. She is not limited. She is not passive. She is not the sweet, helpless youngest child that the family narrative cast her as whenever anyone bothers to think about her at all, which in a household as loud and as dominated by Homer's disasters and Bart's provocations and Lisa's crusades as the Simpson house is less often than it should be. Let us start with the intelligence tests. Across multiple episodes, across multiple contexts, Maggie has been subjected to or has demonstrated intelligence that the show measures, whenever it measures anything, as extraordinary. Off the charts. Beyond what standardized testing in those episodes is designed to accommodate. The show plays these moments as quick jokes. The baby is smart, isn't that funny? Moving on. And the family absorbs the information and does not change its behavior in any measurable way. And by the next episode, the intelligence has been filed away in the same drawer where Springfield keeps all the other things it has decided not to deal with. But the pattern is there. Episode after episode, across different seasons, different contexts, different types of challenge, Maggie demonstrates the same thing: a cognitive capacity that is wildly inconsistent with her developmental state. She understands situations that she should not be able to understand. She makes decisions that require multi-step reasoning that one-year-olds do not have. She anticipates outcomes. She reads people. She solves problems that the adults around her cannot solve. And she does it quietly, without announcement, without drawing attention to the fact that she has done it. The most extensive demonstration of Maggie's intelligence is a short film rather than an episode. The Longest Daycare was a theatrical short released in 2012, screened before Ice Age. Continental Drift in cinemas, and it was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Animated Short Film. It is 7 minutes long and it contains no dialogue. Not because the characters in it cannot speak, but because Maggie does not speak, and the film is told entirely from her perspective. The premise is simple. Maggie is dropped off at the Ayn Rand School for Tots, a daycare facility run with authoritarian efficiency by a caretaker who sorts children based on apparent intelligence and manages the facility with the bleak institutional competence of someone who has stopped thinking of the children in her care as individuals and has started thinking of them as a resource to be managed. Inside the facility, Maggie encounters a caterpillar in the process of forming a chrysalis. She wants to protect it. Another baby, Gerald, a recurring antagonist who has been Maggie's nemesis since the show's earliest seasons, distinguishable by his single eyebrow and his apparently boundless destructive energy, wants to destroy it. What follows is a precisely constructed miniature action film in which Maggie outmaneuvers the bully, the caretaker, and the facility's various systems to protect the chrysalis until the butterfly emerges and can be released safely. She does this without speaking. She does it through observation, planning, improvisation, and adaptive problem-solving. She reads the environment. She identifies threats. She develops strategies in real time. She executes multi-step plans that require spatial awareness, timing, the ability to predict other characters' behavior, and the flexibility to adjust when her plans encounter obstacles. She does all of this while physically restricted to the motor skills of a 1-year-old. She falls, she crawls when she wants to run. Her body cannot keep pace with her mind. Her physical limitations are real and constant, and she compensates for every one of them through cognitive superiority, finding the path that her body can actually navigate rather than the optimal path that would require capabilities she does not yet have. Every decision she makes is correct. Not approximately correct, not correct given her limitations, but actually correct. Every move she makes is the move that an adult with full information and good judgment would make. Adapted to the constraints of being 1-year-old and 24 inches tall. Now, Maggie's silence. Maggie's first word was Daddy. It was voiced by Elizabeth Taylor in a cameo that treated the moment with the weight it deserved. A famous actress, a quiet moment, a baby's first word landing in the silence of a family that had been waiting for it. It happened once. It was significant. And then it did not happen again. For 36 years, Maggie has not developed language in any meaningful way. She is surrounded by a household of extremely verbal people. Homer never stops talking. Marge never stops worrying out loud. Bart never stops provoking and responding and performing. Lisa never stops arguing and analyzing and articulating. The Simpson household is a wall of constant sound. And in the middle of it, Maggie sits in silence. Watching, listening, processing. The theory, and it is a theory that the show supports across multiple episodes without ever making explicit, is that Maggie's silence is not a developmental delay. It is a choice. A deliberate, considered, strategically maintained choice made by a mind intelligent enough to recognize the value of not being noticed. Look at what happens to the intelligent women in this family. Lisa is brilliant. Lisa is possibly the most purely intelligent person in Springfield, a child whose IQ and whose depth of understanding and whose moral seriousness exist several standard deviations above the mean. And what has her intelligence earned her? Isolation, mockery, The endless, grinding exhaustion of being the smartest person in a room that does not want to be improved by the smartest person in the room. Lisa speaks and gets ignored. Lisa challenges authority and gets punished. Lisa fights for things that matter and is consistently, reliably, nearly universally crushed by the indifference and the active resistance of a community that finds her inconvenient. Lisa wears her intelligence on the outside. She announces it. She cannot not announce it because she has not learned or has not been able to make herself the calculation that her younger sister has apparently made. Maggie has watched this. Maggie has watched Lisa's intelligence become a target. Maggie has watched the smartest person in the family be consistently overlooked, undervalued, dismissed, and defeated by a household and a community that rewards compliance and punishes insight. And Maggie has drawn the conclusion that Lisa has not drawn, or rather, has drawn and rejected, because Lisa is constitutionally incapable of staying quiet when she believes something important needs to be said. Maggie's conclusion is this: silence is power. Invisibility is armor. The less they notice you, the more you can accomplish. If they think you are just a baby, helpless, sweet, largely indifferent to the world's operations, they will not watch you. They will not monitor you. They will not be waiting for you to do something remarkable. They will leave you alone in rooms. They will have conversations around you as though you are not processing every word. They will make decisions in your presence that they would not make if they knew how much you understand. And from that position, you can do anything. You can protect butterflies. You can lead daycare rebellions. You can be in a parking lot at exactly the right moment with a gun that has fallen conveniently within reach. You can solve the problems that the adults around you are too distracted or too impaired to solve. And then you can go back to sucking on your pacifier and falling over when you try to walk. And they will attribute anything you did to accident or coincidence or the random activities of a baby who does not really understand what she is doing. Maggie understands exactly what she is doing. The final shot of the Who Shot Mr. Burns episode, where Maggie waits until the room is empty and then makes the trigger pull gesture with her pacifier while checking to ensure she is alone, is the single most explicit moment of this interpretation on offer. It is a one-year-old child demonstrating situational awareness, memory, caution, and impulse control, all in a sequence of actions that takes less than 10 seconds. She waits for privacy. She confirms her isolation. Then she performs the gesture. And then she is still again, back in character, back to being the baby. That sequence is not reflexive. That is not a baby randomly moving her mouth. That is a person who understands that the act she is remembering or reenacting has significance, and who has determined that performing it publicly would have consequences. She has made a cost-benefit calculation about secrecy. She has chosen concealment. That is not what one-year-olds do. That is what very intelligent people do when they have decided that their intelligence is better kept private. Now connect this to the radiation theory. If Springfield's contaminated environment produces mutations that affect each resident differently, Homer and Maggie are the most extreme examples. Homer's exposure, 30-plus years in direct contact with the reactor, preceded by a childhood spent drinking Springfield's water and breathing Springfield's air, produced cognitive diminishment. His brain was compromised before the crayon, and the crayon made it worse. Homer represents what the radiation takes away. Maggie represents what the radiation, in some cases, gives instead. In the same contaminated environment, in the same family, the same radiation that reduced Homer's IQ to 55 has apparently amplified Maggie's to a level that standardized tests cannot accommodate. Same cause, opposite effect. The mutation went differently in her. Whatever the contamination disrupted in Homer's frontal lobe, it seems to have enhanced rather than suppressed in Maggie, producing a cognitive capacity that is, by any measure, extraordinary. Homer and Maggie are two sides of the same radioactive coin. He is the cost. She is the unexpected dividend. And neither of them has ever discussed this with the other, because Homer cannot perceive it, and Maggie has decided that discussing it would be counterproductive. And if the coma theory is true, Maggie's genius takes on a dimension that is almost too heavy to carry. If Homer is dreaming, If every episode since April 1993 is the product of an unconscious mind generating simulations from fragmentary memory, then Maggie's intelligence is Homer's deepest wish for his youngest child, projected into the dream. He cannot see her grow up. He cannot be there for her development. He cannot be the father who is awake and present as she becomes whoever she is becoming. He has no idea in the dream whether she will be okay without him. So in the dream, he makes her extraordinary. He gives her the intelligence that would allow her to take care of herself in a world that is not designed to protect her. He gives her the capability to handle whatever comes, even without him there to handle it. He gives her the tools she would need if her father never wakes up. Her genius is not a mutation. It is a father's prayer. And behind the pacifier, behind 36 years of deliberate silence, something is watching and waiting and planning. Not threatening exactly, not dangerous, except in the way that any concentrated, well-concealed power is dangerous when it finally decides to move. But present, aware, patient in a way that has nothing to do with a baby's limited capacity for agency and everything to do with the strategic patience of someone who has decided that the right moment has not arrived yet. When Maggie finally speaks, when she breaks her silence, when she reveals what she has been carrying behind that blank baby stare for 36 years, Springfield will not see it coming. Nobody will. Because that is exactly how Maggie designed it. And here's the final thing about Maggie that the theories illuminate, but none of them fully say. Maggie is the only member of the Simpson family who has never been broken. Homer has been broken by the radiation, and the crayon, and the mother's exile, and the 36 years of Sector 7G, and the specific accumulated weight of everything that Burns' system did to him before he was old enough to understand what was happening. He functions. He loves his family with a purity that is genuinely moving. But he is not intact. The damage is real, and the show has never pretended otherwise. Lisa has been worn down by the grinding isolation of being the most intelligent person in a community that does not value intelligence. By years of fighting battles, she cannot win. By the specific exhaustion of caring deeply in a place that is organized to reward not caring. She is still fighting. She will always be fighting. But the fight has a cost, and the cost is visible in every episode where she is alone with her saxophone and her too big heart. Marge has sacrificed pieces of herself to hold the family together across 3 decades. Pieces of ambition and expectation and the kind of life she might have built if she had not, at 17, met Homer Simpson and decided that this was worth it. She does not regret it. The show is careful about this. But the sacrifices are real, and Marge carries them with the quiet dignity of someone who made a choice and will not dishonor it by pretending the choice was free. Bart is still performing the rebellion he developed at 10 years old as the only available form of agency, in a household and a community where children have almost no power over anything that matters. The rebellion is authentic. It is also, after 36 years, a cage of a different kind than Ned's. Not installed from outside, but constructed from the inside, the one self-definition available to a boy who needed to be something and chose defiance because defiance was there. But Maggie has never been broken because Maggie has never announced herself. She has never given the system a target. She has never offered the community an angle of attack. She has accumulated 36 years of observation and intelligence and strategic patience, without once allowing the people around her to fully understand what she is or what she is capable of. She is in the specific way that matters in Springfield, the way that determines whether the system will expend resources to contain you, invisible. And invisible things in Springfield are safe. The broken things are the visible ones. The ones who announced themselves too early, who fought too openly, who gave Burns or the community or the simple grinding indifference of the system something to push back against. Mona announced herself to Burns in 1969. Lisa announces herself every episode. The real Seymour Skinner announced himself and was exiled. Maggie has not announced herself. She is still waiting. She is the only one who is still whole. And she has kept herself whole by learning, from the very beginning of her very long year of being 1 year old, that the most dangerous thing in Springfield is not the radiation or the billionaire or the collective amnesia or the floating timeline. The most dangerous thing in Springfield is being seen before you are ready to be seen. She is not ready yet. Or she is ready and we simply have not been told. The show has not told us. And Maggie, who has been waiting patiently for 36 years without giving anything away, is in no particular hurry. 3 generations of damage. There is a story within the story of The Simpsons that most casual viewers know only in outline, if at all. It does not involve the power plant directly. It does not involve the coma or the theories or the mysteries. It is a story about a woman and a choice she made and what that choice cost 3 generations of people who never fully understood why they were paying. Her name is Mona Simpson. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. That was the official story. Abe Simpson, Homer's father, told him she had passed away when Homer was young. He showed Homer a grave. Homer mourned in the particular way that people mourn losses they experienced too young to process properly, not with acute grief, but with a kind of chronic, low-level ache, a background absence that shapes the architecture of a person without their ever fully identifying its cause. And everything about Homer's personality, everything that makes him who he is, the neediness and the clinginess and the terror of abandonment, and the desperate compulsive need to be liked, and the willingness to endure humiliation and abuse and neglect from his employer, rather than risk losing the one stable structure his life has. All of it traces back to this. To the woman whose death he was told about as a child and who left a hole in the shape of a mother that nothing else ever filled completely. In Season 7, the show revealed that the loss was a lie. The episode is called Mother Simpson. It aired November 19th, 1995. It is, by near universal agreement among people who discuss the show seriously, one of the greatest episodes in the series' history. The writing is precise and emotionally honest in a way that the show's comedy chassis does not always permit. And the final scene, Homer sitting on the hood of his car in the dark after his mother has had to flee, watching her taillights disappear, is among the most purely affecting moments the show has ever produced. Here is what the episode reveals. Homer's mother is alive. She did not die. The grave Abe showed him was not hers. It was the grave of Walt Whitman, the poet, whose headstone Abe had apparently been passing off as his wife's burial site for the entirety of Homer's adult life. The casual callousness of that specific deception, using a famous poet's grave as a prop in a lie told to a child, is one of those details that is too strange to be made up, and too specific to be an accident. Homer finds Mona at a cemetery, visiting what she believes is her son's grave. She doesn't recognize him at first. He has changed. He has grown into the person he became in her absence, which is to say a person whose development was shaped entirely by her absence. When he proves who he is, the reunion is everything the episode has built toward. A grown man and his mother, separated for 27 years, finding each other beside a headstone that belongs to neither of them. And then Mona tells him the truth. She did not die. She did not leave because she stopped loving him. She left because Burns made it impossible for her to stay. The story goes back to 1969. Mona Simpson was a housewife. She was married to Abe. She had a young son named Homer. She was, by her own account, and the show's depiction, ordinary. A woman living a quiet life in Springfield while the world outside was burning through the counterculture and the civil rights movement in Vietnam. And then something shifted. Mona became politically active. She joined a group of activists who, the show makes clear while playing the situation for some absurdity, were genuinely motivated by a legitimate cause. They targeted a biological weapons laboratory owned by Burns, not the nuclear plant, a separate facility, a germ warfare lab operated in secret in Springfield, producing biological weapons in the same community where Homer Simpson was growing up, where children were playing, where families were going about their lives with no knowledge that the richest man in town was developing pathogens down the road. Mona and her group broke into the lab. They detonated what the show calls an antibiotic bomb, destroying the biological agents stored inside the facility. During the raid, they accidentally cured the asthma of a security guard who happened to be a young Clancy Wiggum, the man who would later become Springfield's chief of police. The raid was successful. The germs were destroyed. But Mona made one mistake. As the group fled, she stopped to help someone who had fallen. That someone was Burns. She stopped to help the man whose weapon she had just destroyed, and Burns saw her face. He identified her. He reported her to the FBI. And from that moment forward, Mona Simpson was a fugitive. She could not go home. She could not contact her family. She could not hold her son or explain to him why she was leaving. She kissed Homer goodbye while he was sleeping and disappeared into the night. Homer was a child. He woke up and his mother was gone. Abe told him she was dead, and Homer spent the next 30 years of his life believing he was the kind of son whose mother would rather die than come back to him, believing there was something fundamentally wrong with him, something that made people leave. This is not a comedy beat. This is the foundation on which every aspect of Homer's personality was built. The desperation for approval, the terror of abandonment, the willingness to absorb whatever Burns dishes out, because the alternative, losing the job, losing the structure, being alone, is the thing Homer's psyche was wired at age 6 to treat as the most dangerous possible outcome. Burns did not just take Homer's mother. He shaped Homer's psychology through her absence. He created the specific configuration of fear and need and compliance that makes Homer the ideal Sector 7G employee. Now here's the conspiracy dimension. When Mona finally comes back to Springfield in Season 7, Burns recognizes her almost immediately. He spots her through a cab window. He calls the FBI. She has to flee again. Homer has to say goodbye to his mother for the second time, this time knowing why she is leaving and who is responsible. He knows. In that moment, he fully knows. The man who signs his paycheck is the man who destroyed his family. The employer he has spent his entire adult life working for and pleading for approval from is the person who exiled his mother when Homer was too young to do anything about it. And Homer does not connect the dots in any sustained, actionable way. He grieves. He sits on the hood of the car and watches the taillights disappear. And the grief is real, and the show allows it to be real without deflating it with a joke. And then the next episode begins. And Homer is back in Sector 7G, and the connection that should be there between Burns and the loss of his mother, between his employer and the architecture of his damage, is simply not made. Not in any way that changes his behavior. This is not played as a failure of character. It is played quietly as the consequence of everything the radiation theory and the crayon theory describe. Homer's brain cannot maintain that connection. The cognitive damage that has accumulated over a lifetime, the frontal lobe impairment that prevents the kind of sustained analytical reasoning that would be required to understand the pattern his life makes when you stand back far enough to see it, it prevents him from reaching the conclusion that any outside observer would reach immediately. Burns broke him. Burns broke him as a child, and the broken version of Homer is precisely the worker Burns needs. Compliant, desperate for approval, incapable of resistance, grateful for the paycheck, unable to see the man behind the paycheck clearly enough to refuse it. The show confirms the architecture of this arrangement in a later season through the revelation of a deal between Burns and Abe Simpson. Burns had committed a crime. Abe had discovered it. In exchange for Abe's silence, Burns guaranteed Homer a job at the plant, permanent and irremovable regardless of performance. No matter how many mistakes Homer made, no matter how incompetent he was, no matter how many documented errors accumulated in his file, and the show counts 742 of them at one point, Homer would not be permanently dismissed. The German investors who briefly purchased the plant fired Homer within days of their acquisition. They assessed the cost of bringing the facility up to code and nearly went bankrupt from the estimate alone. Burns bought the plant back and immediately rehired Homer, because a competent safety inspector would shut the plant down. Homer's incompetence is not an inconvenience to be managed. It is a feature of the system. It is what the system was designed to produce and protect. Homer's job security was never about his performance. It was a contractual obligation between his father and his mother's persecutor, brokered in silence, maintained in secret, and never explained to Homer, because explaining it would require explaining everything else. And everything else, seen clearly, is unbearable. Mona Simpson died in a later season. Her death scene is one of the show's most quietly devastating moments. Homer sits beside her. He holds her hand. He watches the mother he barely knew leave for the last time. No joke, no reset, no comic deflation. Just a man and his mother and the weight of 27 stolen years pressing down on both of them simultaneously. And the man who stole those years is still running the power plant. He is still in his office, being kept alive by his weekly treatments, unable to reliably remember the name of the man who lost the most because of him. He has not been held accountable. He will not be held accountable. Because in Springfield, accountability requires a mechanism that does not exist. A level of institutional independence and civic courage that the radiation theory says has been systematically impaired, and the collective denial theory says has been systematically suppressed, and the coma theory says was never real to begin with. Homer stands at the center of it, too damaged to see the pattern clearly, too dependent to break free, working every day in the facility owned by the man who made him this way, powering the lights of a house built on land, owned by the town that produced the contamination that shaped his skull and has limited his mind and drove his mother underground. 3 generations of Simpsons, broken by one man's grudge. And Homer shows up on time every morning because Marge needs the health insurance and the kids need to eat. Which is, when you get to the bottom of it, not a cartoon joke at all. It is perhaps the most honest thing the show has ever said. The sentence under which everything, the radiation and the coma and the conspiracy and the immortal billionaire and the exile of Mona Simpson and the crayon in the skull and the 742 documented errors and the 36 years of improbable survival can be organized and understood. Homer shows up because the family needs him to show up. Not because he is adequate to the job. Not because the job deserves his compliance. Not because Burns has earned one more day of Homer's labor. Because the family needs the health insurance and the kids need to eat, and Homer's love for them, uncomplicated and unconditional and operating fully independently of his cognitive limitations, means that he will keep showing up for as long as that need exists. Burns designed a system to produce exactly this. The deal with Abe, the exile of Mona, the crayon that nobody removed, the radiation that nobody measured, the violations that nobody remediated, all of it, every element, was the construction of a trap whose bait was a man's love for his family. Burns did not need Homer to love the job. He needed Homer to love something that the job could hold hostage. And the family was always going to be that thing. The family was the only leverage that would work on Homer, because it was the only thing Homer would not walk away from, regardless of the cost. The conspiracy against the Simpson family is not paranoid speculation. It is the literal plot of multiple episodes, confirmed by the show's own canon, described explicitly in the interactions between Burns, Abe, Mona, and Homer across 3 generations of story. Burns persecuted Mona because she destroyed his weapons lab. He used his influence to exile her. He made a deal with Abe that guaranteed Homer's employment in exchange for silence. He kept Homer in Sector 7G not out of negligence, but because Homer in Sector 7G is the system working as designed. And the system works because Homer loves his family, and his family needs him employed, and Burns is the one doing the employing. The only thing Burns miscalculated was this. The family's love for Homer is as unconditional as Homer's love for them. He took Homer's mother. He impaired Homer's mind. He took Homer's potential. He took Homer's ability to understand what was being taken. And Homer, in the specific and stubborn way that Homer endures everything, is still there, still on the couch, still on Amai, still surrounded by the people who love him regardless of what he has been made into. Still in the specific, limited vocabulary of his damaged but intact heart, fine. Burns did not break the family. He just made it more expensive to hold together. And Homer has been paying that price every morning for 36 years without complaint, because Marge needs the health insurance and the kids need to eat. Section 8. The predictions. How Springfield keeps getting the future right. Let us talk about the phenomenon that made The Simpsons more famous in the 2020s than it was during its own golden age. The predictions. The idea, which by now has penetrated so far into popular consciousness that it functions less as a theory than as a cultural assumption, is that a cartoon sitcom created in 1989 has been accurately forecasting world events for more than 30 years. That somewhere in Springfield's 788 episodes is encoded a map of the future. That the show knows things it should not know. that its writers, whoever they are and whatever their methods, have access to something the rest of us do not. The examples you have probably already heard. In the year 2000, the episode Bart to the Future depicted a future in which Lisa Simpson becomes the first female president of the United States. Her predecessor, the one who has left the presidency's finances in ruins, is identified as Donald Trump. The episode aired 16 years before the 2016 election. 16 years before Trump won the presidency, the show presented a Trump administration as a joke about the logical endpoint of celebrity culture and American political dysfunction. Then the punchline arrived in real life in November of 2016, and the internet lost its collective mind. Screenshots from the episode went viral. The Simpsons predicted Trump became a meme that spread far beyond the show's actual fan base. People who had not watched the series in 2 decades were sharing clips. People who had never watched it at all were sharing clips. The phrase entered mainstream consciousness as a kind of shorthand for the uncanny, the idea that somehow this show had seen something coming that everyone else missed. And that is just the headline. The list is genuinely extensive. In a 1995 episode, the show depicted a wrist-mounted communication device that bears a striking resemblance to modern smartwatches, 2 decades before the Apple Watch made that technology ordinary. In a 1998 episode, Homer encounters what appears to be a mathematical formulation that researchers later noted has structural similarities to an equation that predicted the mass of the Higgs boson particle, the so-called God particle that was not experimentally confirmed until 2012. In a 1999 episode, Homer proposes a theory about the universe being shaped like a donut, a toroidal structure. Years later, cosmologists analyzing radiation patterns in the cosmic microwave background found evidence suggesting the universe might actually have a toroidal topology. In a 1993 episode called Marge in Chains, a flu virus originating in Asia spreads to Springfield, causing mass panic, stockpiling of supplies, and a frantic search for a cure while civic institutions struggle to respond coherently. The episode aired 27 years before the COVID-19 pandemic. In that same episode, in the chaos of the fictional outbreak, townspeople accidentally release a swarm of aggressive insects, which felt, during the spring of 2020, when Asian giant hornets were being discovered in the Pacific Northwest, and the media had dubbed them murder hornets, like one of those coincidences that requires you to sit down for a moment. In 1998, the show depicted the Walt Disney Company acquiring 20th Century Fox. This happened in 2019, more than 2 decades later, as part of a $71 billion acquisition that restructured the American entertainment industry. In 1996, an episode called Homer Palooza featured a comedic scene in which the hip-hop group Cypress Hill accidentally books the London Symphony Orchestra while in a chemically altered state. That exact pairing, Cypress Hill and the London Symphony Orchestra, actually performed together at the Royal Albert Hall in London in 2024. 28 years between the joke and the reality. Now, the official explanation from the people who make the show. Executive producer Al Jean has addressed the prediction phenomenon directly and repeatedly. His answer is both blunt and correct. If you throw enough darts, you are going to hit some bullseyes. Producer Bill Oakley, who ran the show during several of its peak seasons, was even more direct. There are very few cases where the show predicted something. It is mainly just coincidence because the episodes are so old that history repeats itself. This is the correct answer. It is the responsible, accurate, non-mystical answer, and it is supported by basic probability theory. The Simpsons has produced nearly 800 episodes over 36 years. Each episode contains dozens of jokes, references, satirical observations, speculative imaginings, and cultural extrapolations. When you generate that volume of content over that length of time, some portion of it will align with future events through the simple operation of statistics. The predictions are not supernatural. They are the natural output of a long-running show filtered through confirmation bias. We remember the hits and forget the misses, and there are many, many misses. The Simpsons has also predicted jetpacks that have not materialized, moon colonies that remain hypothetical, political outcomes that went the opposite direction, and cultural shifts that never happened. Nobody screenshots those. Nobody builds theories around the failed predictions. Confirmation bias only runs in one direction, toward the things that match. Furthermore, and this is the part that is often glossed over, many of the most apparently prophetic moments are not predictions at all. They are extrapolations from trends that were already in motion when the episodes were written. The Trump episode did not predict Trump's presidency. It observed that Trump had been publicly musing about running for president since the late 1980s, had positioned himself in the culture as the definitive avatar of ostentatious American wealth, and took the observation to its logical, satirical extreme. The writers were not seeing the future. They were reading the present with unusual attentiveness and projecting it forward a step or two. The Disney-Fox prediction was not prophecy. It was the observation that media consolidation was accelerating, that the major studios were getting larger and fewer, extrapolated to its obvious endpoint. The Simpsons was already owned by Fox when the episode aired, which gave the writers both the proximity to have direct knowledge of how Fox operated and the creative freedom that sometimes comes with having insight into a system from the inside. The smartwatch prediction was not technology clairvoyance. It was the observation that computers were getting smaller and more personal and would eventually be worn on the body, an extrapolation that dozens of science fiction writers had already made by the mid-90s. The Simpsons writing staff has historically been among the most educated in television. Multiple writers hold advanced degrees from institutions, including Harvard, Yale, MIT, and the University of California. The show has had writers with backgrounds in mathematics, physics, computer science, political theory, history, and economics. These are not people pulling wild guesses from the air. They are well-read, analytically sophisticated observers of American culture who have spent their careers studying how systems work, how trends evolve, and where trajectories lead when you follow them honestly to their conclusions. They are not predicting, they are reading. And here is where the explanation becomes insufficient without being wrong. Some of the predictions are specific in a way that statistical probability and trend extrapolation struggle to fully account for. The Trump episode did not just predict that a celebrity might run for president. It predicted Trump, by name, in an episode that also depicted him descending an escalator, which mirrors the staging of Trump's actual campaign announcement in 2015, where he descended an escalator in Trump Tower to the sound of Neil Young's Rockin' in the Free World. The staging detail is eerie in a way that the trend extrapolation explanation does not neatly address. The Siegfried and Roy episode did not just predict that exotic animal acts could be dangerous. It depicted a white tiger specifically attacking one of the performers, which is almost precisely what happened when Roy Horn was critically injured by a tiger during a live show in 2003. The specificity is uncomfortable. These are not just directional hits, episodes that got the general shape of a trend right without the details. These are cases where details align in ways that feel like more than coincidence, even knowing that the confirmation bias filter is at work, even knowing that the volume of the show's output makes a certain number of improbable alignments statistically expected. Which brings us to the theory that is, in a way, more interesting than any of the supernatural explanations. The Simpsons does not predict the future. The Simpsons shapes it, not through magic, not through some occult mechanism whereby the show's writers access information the rest of the world does not have. Through cultural influence, through the specific and particular power of a show that has been woven into the fabric of American consciousness for 36 years. The Simpsons is one of the most watched, most quoted, most referenced, and most deeply internalized pieces of American media in history. Its observations have become part of how Americans understand their culture. Its jokes have become part of the language. When the show makes a joke about Trump becoming president, that joke enters the cultural bloodstream, circulated by millions of viewers, referenced at dinner tables, and in offices, and in the low-frequency cultural conversation that runs beneath daily life. It becomes a reference point. It makes the idea feel familiar before the idea has actually arrived. When reality catches up to the joke, the response is not shock. It is recognition. A sense of déjà vu that feels like prophecy, but is actually the result of having been culturally prepared for the outcome years in advance. The joke did not predict the future. The joke made the future feel inevitable. And when the inevitable arrived, it was not a surprise. This is not a trivial thing. The capacity to make an outcome feel inevitable before it happens, to shift the Overton window of cultural possibility so that something which would previously have seemed outlandish begins to seem not just possible but obvious, is a form of cultural power that is rarely made visible while it is operating. The Simpsons has been exercising this power for 3.5 decades, and the predictions phenomenon is one of the few moments when the mechanics of that exercise become briefly visible to the public. Springfield does not reflect America. America has become Springfield. The show held up a mirror for 36 years, and we stared into it so long that we started to resemble what we saw. The nuclear power plant, the corrupt and seemingly immortal billionaire, the incompetent safety infrastructure, the population too distracted and too cognitively overloaded to notice how systematically it is being exploited, the endless cycle of catastrophe and reset, the collective amnesia that allows the same dynamics to reproduce themselves generation after generation. These are not predictions. They are diagnoses. They were diagnoses in 1989, and they remain diagnoses now. And the fact that the country has moved further in the direction of the diagnosis rather than away from it is not evidence that the show predicted anything. It is evidence that the show was paying attention when most people were not. And here, finally, is the thing that should give us a little pause before we close this section and move on. The show has also made jokes that have not come true. Thousands of them. We do not talk about those. We do not screenshot the failed predictions, the speculations that went nowhere, the satirical observations that pointed in directions history did not take. We filter them out automatically because confirmation bias is not a cognitive error we consciously commit. It is a feature of how human memory works. The hits get stored, the misses get discarded, and the resulting highlight reel looks like prophecy. But try telling that to the part of your brain that is already starting to form the question, what else has the show depicted that has not happened yet? What is still sitting in an episode from 1997, unactualized, waiting for the right moment to transform from a joke into a headline? Even knowing how the trick works, it is still impressive to watch. 800 episodes, 36 years, thousands of satirical observations, and enough bullseyes to make even the show's own creators pause, just occasionally, and wonder. There is one more dimension of the prediction phenomenon that deserves attention before we move on. Something that the viral clip culture around the predictions tends to flatten out in its enthusiasm for the surface-level coincidences. The Simpsons predictions are not uniformly distributed across the show's run. They cluster. The predictions that land most accurately, that feel most eerily specific, that are hardest to explain away as pure coincidence or trend extrapolation, they tend to come from the show's earlier seasons. The episodes from the years when the writing staff was at its most intellectually engaged, its most analytically rigorous, its most willing to follow the implications of a satirical premise, all the way to its logical endpoint, rather than stopping at the comfortable distance of the obvious joke. The Trump prediction came from Season 11, the Siegfried and Roy prediction from Season 5, the Disney-Fox merger prediction from Season 10, the Higgs-boson equation from Season 10, the smartwatch from Season 6, the pandemic from Season 4. These are all Golden Age episodes, episodes from the period when the show was at peak creative confidence, when the writers were least constrained by the pressure to maintain audience familiarity and most willing to take risks that required genuine knowledge of how systems work and where trajectories lead. The later seasons produce fewer verified predictions. This is partly because later season predictions have had less time to be confirmed or denied by actual events. But it is also, the prediction theory quietly argues, because the later seasons were produced by a brain that was less analytically sharp, more dependent on established patterns, less willing or able to follow the uncomfortable implications of the world's direction to their honest conclusions. If the coma theory is right, the predictions cluster in the early seasons because the dreaming brain is at its sharpest in the period immediately following the coma. The recent memories are most vivid. The simulations are running on the most accurate and complete data available to a brain that is, over time, losing resolution. Later seasons blur. Later seasons repeat. Later seasons cycle through familiar patterns with less and less specificity. Because the data that the dreaming mind is working with is becoming stale, becoming fragmented, becoming what old memories become in every brain, an outline rather than a texture, a shape rather than a detail. Whether or not you accept the coma theory, this observation about the prediction clustering is structurally interesting. The show was most prescient when it was most analytically rigorous. It was most analytically rigorous in the years when the writing staff was most intellectually invested and least constrained by commercial pressures. The predictions are not mystical. They are the natural output of a group of very smart people paying very close attention to where the world was heading and being willing to say what they saw. And the lesson of the prediction phenomenon, extracted from all the viral clips and the internet debates and the genuinely unsettling moments of specificity, is not that the show has magical foresight. It is that careful, honest attention to the present is itself a form of prophecy, that the future is not hidden from the people who are willing to look at the present without flinching, that the show's most accurate predictions were not predictions at all, but simply accurate descriptions of existing realities that had not yet fully arrived. Springfield was always there. We just had not caught up to it. And here's what that means for how you watch the show going forward. If the prediction phenomenon has done anything useful beyond generating viral content and debates about whether the writers are time travelers, it means that every episode of The Simpsons that you have ever treated as pure comedy, as a half hour of absurdist entertainment with no relationship to the actual world, was also something else. It was a document, a record of the specific moment in American cultural history when the episode was written, seen through the specific analytical lens of a writing staff that was paying very close attention to where things were going and translating that attention into jokes. The jokes are real. The comedy is real. The show is genuinely, durably, consistently funny in a way that decades of repetition and overexposure have not fully degraded. But the jokes are also true. They were true when they were written, and many of them are more true now than they were then, because the trends they were extrapolating from have had 36 years to develop into the things the jokes were pointing at. The nuclear plant, the captured regulator, the billionaire above accountability, the population too distracted to notice the water quality, the town that forgets its disasters between episodes. These are not just jokes. They are the shape of things. They were the shape of things in 1989, and they are the shape of things now. And the show has been documenting that shape for longer than most of its audience has been alive. The predictions are real. They were always going to be real. Because Springfield is real. It has always been real. We just drew it in yellow. Section 9. Where is Springfield, the town that refuses to exist? There is a question about The Simpsons that seems, on the surface, to be a trivia question. The kind of thing you might encounter in a pub quiz or a fan site FAQ. The kind of thing that has an answer sitting somewhere in the show's production history, waiting to be found and cited and settled. Where is Springfield? Which state? After 36 seasons and 788 episodes, the answer should be easy. The show has been running long enough to have established every conceivable detail of its fictional world. We know Homer's social security number. We know the address of the house on Evergreen Terrace. We know the names of characters who appear in the background of a single scene and never return. The show is encyclopedically detailed about Springfield in almost every dimension, except its location. Springfield borders Ohio in one episode and Nevada in another. It has an ocean in some episodes and is landlocked in others. It is near mountains. It is near deserts. It has a harbor. It has farmland. It has a climate that ranges from deep winter blizzards to tropical heat waves within the span of a single season. Its area code, glimpsed briefly in one episode, begins with 636, which is a Missouri code. A state abbreviation shown on a sign in another episode reads NT, which is not a real American state abbreviation. When Homer calls the state capital in yet another episode, the voice on the other end references a state that begins with a vowel, which eliminates some options while keeping dozens of others viable. The show has been doing this deliberately. Every time a clue surfaces that seems to narrow the possibilities down, another clue appears in a different episode that contradicts it. The process is not accidental. It is not the result of lazy continuity. The show is too consistent in too many other areas to claim carelessness here. This is active, sustained, deliberate ambiguity, maintained across 36 years, and hundreds of writers as a consistent creative policy. Matt Groening, the show's creator, named the town after Springfield, Oregon. He confirmed this in a 2012 interview with Smithsonian Magazine. He grew up near Springfield, Oregon. He chose Springfield as the town's name because it is one of the most common place names in the United States. There are Springfields in dozens of states, which meant no viewer anywhere could be certain the show was not set in their Springfield. And because his childhood familiarity with the real Springfield gave him a particular textured sense of what a place called Springfield ought to feel like. For approximately 48 hours, the mystery was solved. Springfield was in Oregon. The interview was shared. The answer was cited. The question was, apparently, settled. And then the show kept going. Episodes aired after the interview that placed Springfield in geographic context completely inconsistent with Oregon. The writers did not honor Groening's disclosure. The ambiguity was restored within weeks, as if the brief moment of clarity had been a mistake to be corrected rather than an answer to be accepted. Because the mystery is the point. The geographic impossibility of Springfield, its simultaneous possession of oceans and mountains and deserts and farmland and Arctic winters and tropical summers, is not a continuity failure. It is the show's most sophisticated, long-running joke. Springfield is not a place you can find on a map, because Springfield is not any one place. It is every place. It is assembled from pieces of every American community that has ever existed, layered on top of each other without regard for geographic logic, because the show's fundamental purpose is not to depict a specific region of the United States, but to depict the United States itself. The industrial decay is Rust Belt. The suburban sprawl is Sun Belt. The small-town insularity is New England. The cultural blankness is the Midwest. The political corruption is universal. Springfield contains all of these simultaneously because America contains all of these simultaneously, and the show is trying to say something true about America. And something true about America requires being able to access all of it at once. This is the surface explanation. It is accurate. It is the one Groening and his writers have offered in various forms over the years. Springfield is universal. Springfield is every town. Springfield is designed to feel familiar regardless of where you grew up. But under the theories we have been exploring, the geographic impossibility takes on additional dimensions. Under the radiation theory, Springfield's impossible geography is of a piece with its impossible biology. If the people of Springfield have 4 fingers and yellow skin and can survive falls that should kill them and do not age despite the passage of decades, why should the town's geography obey rules that the people's biology does not? The radiation that has warped Springfield's population has perhaps warped the landscape itself. The contamination does not stop at the skin. It extends into the physical environment, compressing geographic features that should be hundreds of miles apart into a single impossible region, bending the rules of space and distance the way it has bent the rules of cellular aging and cognitive function. Under the coma theory, Springfield's geography makes intuitive sense as dream geography. Homer's dreaming brain does not contain a precise cartographic map of America. It contains impressions and fragments, a coastline seen on a family vacation, a mountain range glimpsed through a car window, a desert from a movie, farmland from a drive through somewhere flat and wide. His unconscious mind assembled Springfield from every American landscape he had ever experienced or imagined, stacking them without regard for geographic logic, because dreams do not have geographic logic. Dreams have emotional logic. Springfield feels like America because it is made from Homer's memory of America, and Homer's memory is scattered and incomplete and held together by feeling rather than geography. Under the collective denial theory, the one advanced most explicitly by the Principal and the Pauper episode, which we will examine shortly, Springfield's undefined location is its most powerful structural feature. You cannot investigate a town you cannot find. You cannot bring federal charges against a nuclear power plant if the state it is located in keeps changing. You cannot hold anyone accountable for anything if the jurisdiction is perpetually undefined. Springfield floats between states because floating is safer than landing. Landing means accountability. Landing means someone shows up with a map and a badge and a legal framework and starts asking questions about the three-eyed fish and the cracked cooling towers and the billionaire who glows in the dark and remembers wars that ended a century ago. A town with no fixed location has no fixed regulatory authority, no consistent EPA oversight, no permanent state attorney general with jurisdiction over its nuclear facility, no reliable mechanism for the kind of external accountability that the people inside the town are too cognitively impaired or too collectively invested in denial to impose themselves. Burns benefits from this ambiguity directly. His plant's operation depends on it. A plant with a clearly identified regulatory authority might face sustained oversight. A plant that sits in a jurisdictional no man's land, clearly belonging to whatever state is most convenient for the purposes of the current episode, has a structural protection against accountability that no amount of money alone could purchase. And there is an episode that makes this dynamic explicit in a way that is both funny and quietly disturbing. In the season 12 episode called Behind the Laughter, a mockumentary about the Simpson family in the style of a VH1 documentary, Springfield's location is finally given a definitive answer. In the original broadcast, the family is identified as being from northern Kentucky. The answer is presented within the episode's mockumentary framing as a fact. Springfield is in northern Kentucky. Except in syndicated reruns, this detail was changed. In the version of the episode that most people have seen, Springfield is identified as being from a different state. The specific location given in the original broadcast is not the specific location given in reruns. The answer depends on which version of the episode you are watching. The show gave you the truth and then changed the truth. The answer is literally different depending on when and where you watch it. Even the definitive answer is not definitive. Even the one moment in the show's history when a concrete location was specified was subsequently revised, quietly, without announcement, without explanation, because even an answer given in a mockumentary framing was too concrete to leave standing. Every state in the Union has been proposed as Springfield's home at some point by fans, critics, or the show itself. Every theory has evidence. Every theory has contradiction. The show has been manufacturing this state of permanent ambiguity for 36 years, and it has sustained that ambiguity with a precision and a consistency that speaks to deliberate policy rather than oversight. Springfield will never be located. Not because the show cannot decide, but because the show decided long ago that Springfield is more useful as a mystery than as an answer. A town that could be anywhere is a town that belongs to everyone, and a town that belongs to everyone cannot be dismissed as someone else's problem. It is your problem. It has always been your problem, wherever you are from. But let us stay with the geography a moment longer, because the location question connects to another piece of Springfield's impossible infrastructure that deserves its own careful attention. The episode that the show's fan base has argued about for nearly 3 decades, the one that critics declared the moment the show lost its mind, the one that the coma theory and the denial theory and the collective memory theory all point to as the most structurally revealing episode in the show's entire run. Season 9, Episode 2, The Principal and the Pauper, aired September 28, 1997. The episode introduces a stranger who walks into Springfield Elementary during a ceremony honoring Principal Seymour Skinner's 20 years of service. The stranger identifies himself as the real Seymour Skinner, a decorated Vietnam veteran who was captured as a prisoner of war, presumed dead, and who survived and came home to find that someone else had assumed his identity. The man Springfield has known as Skinner is revealed to be Armin Tamzarian, a former street criminal who served in the same unit as the real Skinner, who felt responsible for Skinner's capture, and who traveled to Springfield to deliver the news of Skinner's death to his mother, Agnes. Agnes assumed he was her son. He went along with it. He became Seymour Skinner. He lived inside a stolen identity for 20 years. The real Seymour Skinner walks through the door. The truth is fully exposed. Every person in Springfield knows that their principal is a fraud, and Springfield holds a meeting. At the meeting, the town votes not on whether to prosecute Tamzarian, not on how to restore Skinner's identity, not on any of the logical responses to the situation they have just learned about. They vote on whether to acknowledge the truth at all. The vote is unanimous. They vote to keep the lie. Judge Snyder, an officer of a court, a person whose entire professional function is to adjudicate truth, issues a legal decree that the imposter is the real Skinner. The actual Seymour Skinner, the war hero who survived captivity and came home to find his life inhabited by a stranger, is tied to a railroad car and physically expelled from Springfield. And the judge makes it explicitly illegal to ever mention the truth again under penalty of torture. The fans hated this episode. The backlash was immediate and sustained. Harry Shearer, who voices Skinner, publicly stated his opposition to the storyline. Critics argued it destroyed a beloved character by revealing everything about him was built on a lie. It consistently appears on worst episodes lists. It has been called the moment The Simpsons stopped caring about its own continuity. But here's what the critics consistently miss. The episode is not a mistake. The episode is a diagnosis. It is the one episode in the show's entire run that shows you, in real time, on screen, in explicit and unambiguous detail, the exact mechanism by which Springfield maintains the impossible reality we have been exploring all night. Springfield does not forget its catastrophes, its contradictions, its impossibilities by accident. It forgets them on purpose. It forgets them through a collective social contract that says we do not acknowledge the things that would require us to change. It forgets them through the same mechanism the principal and the pauper depicts, through a vote, through an official decree, through the legal criminalization of inconvenient truth, and the physical expulsion of anyone who insists on it. Every other time Springfield has reset after something world-altering, every episode where the dome is removed and nobody mentions the dome, every morning after the sun was blocked and nobody asks about the sun, every continuity error the show has accumulated across 788 episodes, it happens off-screen. We do not see the forgetting. We just see the result of it. We arrive at the beginning of the next episode and everything is back to baseline, and we accept it because we have learned from years of watching this show that this is how Springfield works. The Principal and the Pauper is the one episode that let us watch the mechanism in operation. It showed us the vote, it showed us the decree, it showed us the man tied to the train car. It showed us the legal prohibition on remembering. It made explicit the process that every other episode leaves implicit. The real Seymour Skinner was Springfield's canary in the coal mine. He was the man who showed up with undeniable proof that the official narrative was a lie. He had documentation. He had a name and a rank and a military record that predated the lie. He had the irrefutable evidence of his own existence. And the town's response was not to acknowledge the truth. It was to vote the truth out of existence and exile the truth-teller. That is the infrastructure of Springfield's denial made visible. That is the machine behind every impossible reset. And it is not a cartoon trope. It is a recognizable human behavior, scaled up to a town-wide operation. The capacity of communities, real communities, not cartoon ones, to collectively decide that a certain truth is too expensive to acknowledge and to organize their institutional life around maintaining the less expensive fiction is not an exaggeration or a satire. It is a documented feature of how communities work, particularly communities that are economically organized around a single industry or a single employer, and that cannot afford to acknowledge the harms that industry or employer produces. Springfield cannot acknowledge the radiation because the radiation comes from the plant, and the plant is the economy. Springfield cannot acknowledge that Skinner is Tamsarian because Tamsarian has been Skinner for 20 years, and everybody's relationship with him is built on the fiction. Springfield cannot acknowledge that the dome was real, that the sun was blocked, that the three-eyed fish is in the river, that the man they elected to run their school is living under a stolen name, because each acknowledgement pulls on a thread that connects to every other thread, and pulling on threads is how the whole fabric comes apart. So they vote. They make it illegal to remember. And the real Skinner is somewhere out there on a train, exiled from his own life, the last honest man in a town that made honesty illegal. We have spent a great deal of time with the Simpson family. We have gone deep into Homer's damage and Lisa's isolation, and Maggie's concealment and Marge's patience and Bart's rebellion. We have traced Burns's immortality and Smithers' devotion and the power plant's contamination and the whole interlocking system of cause and effect and denial that keeps Springfield running. But Springfield is not just the Simpsons. Springfield has a population of citizens who have been living alongside this family for 36 years, absorbing the same contamination, operating within the same denial, cycling through the same endless loops. And some of them carry their own mysteries, their own theories, their own quietly devastating subtexts that the show has been developing in the background while Homer eats donuts and Bart skateboards. Let us start with Hans Moleman. Hans Moleman is the small, elderly, nearly blind man who appears in the background of Springfield scenes and exists, as far as anyone can determine, for one primary narrative purpose: to suffer. He is hit by cars. He is crushed by falling objects. He is buried alive. He is mauled by animals. He is incinerated. He walks into traffic and disappears under wheels. He is electrocuted. He falls from heights. He is forgotten in places where people can no longer hear him calling for help. By conservative estimate, Hans Moleman has been killed on screen more times than any other character in the history of American animation. Not in Treehouse of Horror episodes, not in dream sequences, not in fantasy cutaways, in regular, canonical, main continuity episodes of The Simpsons. He dies. And then, in the next episode, he is fine. He appears in the background, shuffling through whatever Springfield scene requires a small, elderly figure in the background, apparently unaffected by the death that occurred 2 episodes ago. No explanation, no resurrection scene, no acknowledgement from any other character that this man died and has somehow returned. He is simply there, ready for the next disaster. The standard reading is that this is a running gag, a joke about cartoons and consequence and the way in animated shows sidestep the implications of their own physics. Moleman dies a lot. It is funny. Do not think about it. But the theories we have been discussing all night do not permit us to stop thinking about it. Under the radiation theory, Hans Moleman represents the most extreme mutation in Springfield, a man whose biology has been so fundamentally altered by decades of exposure to the power plant's contamination that his cells can reconstitute themselves after fatal trauma. He does not survive his deaths the way Homer survives injuries. Homer takes damage and heals. Homer's resilience is extraordinary, but it operates within a recognizable biological framework. The show depicts him bruised and recovering, battered but intact. Moleman actually dies. His body ceases to function, and then it comes back. This is a mutation beyond anything else in Springfield's population. If the radiation can do what it has done to Homer's healing rate and Burns's disease equilibrium, and Maggie's intelligence and the fish's eye count, the logical extension of those effects at even higher concentrations, or in a body with a particular genetic predisposition, might produce exactly what Moleman displays: cellular regeneration after death. A body so thoroughly restructured at the genetic level that death is not a permanent state but a temporary one. A biological reset that the body itself performs. Under the coma theory, Moleman serves a different function. He is a background process in Homer's dream. He is a minor character that Homer's dreaming mind does not invest with the same computational resources it invests in the Simpsons themselves. A prop, essentially, a figure that exists to populate the peripheral zones of Springfield and make them feel inhabited. When Moleman dies, it is the dream momentarily losing track of a background character it does not particularly need to maintain. When he reappears, it is the dream reassembling him from the minimal information it has stored about who Hans Moleman is and what he looks like and what purpose he serves. He is not a person in this reading. He is a dream character, which means his death and return carry no more narrative weight than a set piece that gets knocked over between takes and then set back upright for the next scene. Under the collective denial framework, Moleman's deaths are simply another thing that Springfield has agreed, collectively and without discussion, not to notice. A man dies in public, repeatedly, visibly, in front of witnesses, and nobody investigates. Nobody calls for an inquiry into why this keeps happening. Nobody asks how he keeps coming back. The town has normalized Moleman's death cycle with the same effortless efficiency it has applied to the three-eyed fish and the glowing employer and the blocked sun and everything else that should be alarming and has been absorbed into the background of daily life. There is one detail about Hans Moleman that sits by itself in the category of genuinely strange. In one episode, when asked his age, Moleman states that he is 31 years old. 31. Hans Moleman, who appears to be somewhere between 70 and 90, who moves with the slow and cautious gait of a person whose body has been at odds with the world for a very long time, who has eyes so impaired that navigating the basic physical environment of Springfield is a constant challenge. This man is 31 years old. If he is telling the truth, and the show does not give us any particular reason to believe he is lying, Then something accelerated his aging dramatically. Something took a man in what should be the prime of his life and compressed decades of physical deterioration into a much shorter span. Something that also, somehow, made him nearly indestructible despite his apparent frailty. Something that made death a revolving door rather than a permanent exit. The radiation theory, again, has an answer. Accelerated aging is a well-documented effect of high levels of radiation exposure. The same exposure that might produce regenerative mutations in certain biological configurations could, in others, produce extreme premature aging. A body that has been cycling through cellular damage and repair at a rate so accelerated that the normal progression from youth to middle age to old age happens in a fraction of the time. Molman looks ancient because, at the cellular level, he is ancient. His cells have gone through more cycles of damage and repair than most bodies accumulate in a full natural lifespan. He is 31 years old and he has the biology of a 90-year-old because the radiation aged him from the inside out. And it also made him essentially unkillable. He is the tragedy in the background of every scene. The man who has been most visibly destroyed by what Springfield is, who shows the most extreme external evidence of what the contamination does to a body, and who is read by everyone, by the characters in the show, and by most viewers watching it, as a recurring sight gag. A source of quick, comfortable laughs about cartoon logic and the expendability of minor characters. He falls off a cliff. He comes back. He is 31 years old and he looks like a very old man and nobody has ever asked him why. Now let us talk about Ned Flanders. Ned Flanders is, on the surface, everything Homer Simpson is not. He is kind. He is generous. He is devoutly and sincerely religious. He is physically fit. He is financially responsible. He is a good father to Rod and Todd, his two sons, who are the most well-mannered children in a town full of children who are essentially feral. He is a good neighbor. He brings food. He offers help. He forgives slights with a speed and a consistency that genuinely borders on the supernatural. By any objective measure, Ned Flanders is a better person than Homer Simpson in almost every conceivable way. And the show has punished him for this, relentlessly and without remorse, for 36 years. His wife Maud was killed at the Springfield Motor Speedway. She was killed by a t-shirt launcher, a promotional cannon fired at the crowd during a race, which Homer dodged by ducking at precisely the wrong moment, causing the t-shirt to sail past him and strike Maud in the bleachers above. The trajectory was entirely a consequence of Homer's reflexive self-preservation. Homer's instinct to protect himself from a promotional t-shirt killed Ned Flanders' wife. And Ned forgave him. Ned processed his grief through his faith and his community and his therapy and his capacity for forgiveness. And he forgave the man who widowed him without, as far as the show depicts, ever fully holding Homer accountable for the specific role Homer's behavior played in Maud's death. Because that is what Ned does. He forgives. He turns the other cheek. He absorbs punishment after punishment after punishment and responds with grace. Except once. When a hurricane destroys Ned's house, not just damages it, destroys it, renders it uninhabitable, the community rallies to rebuild it. And they rebuild it terribly. The house that the community constructs is structurally unsound, aesthetically a disaster, built with the lovingly incompetent effort of people who have very good intentions and no construction skills whatsoever. And when Ned comes home to find this replacement for the home he loved, something in him breaks. He snaps. He goes out onto his lawn and he says the things he has been holding in for years. The things about Homer and about the community and about the specific, accumulated texture of what it feels like to be the person who always tries hardest and always gets hit hardest and always forgives most completely and never, not once, gets anything back for it. He says these things loudly and he says them clearly and he means every word. And then he is institutionalized. In the facility, the therapist who treats him uncovers something that reframes Ned's entire character. Ned was not always like this. As a child, he was violent and uncontrollable, a small and chaotic person whose behavior his parents, who are beatniks who do not believe in discipline and say so explicitly, could not manage. They took him to a therapist. The therapist spent years conditioning the aggression out of him, not through talk therapy or emotional development, but through what amounts to behavioral reprogramming, a sustained and intensive modification of Ned's responses to stress and frustration and anger that essentially replaced his natural emotional reactions with a different constructed set. Ned's kindness is not a character trait. It is a yi. It is a psychological structure built around a feral child by an adult who had good intentions and a methodology that, evaluated from the outside, looks less like therapy and more like the systematic suppression of an entire emotional range. The anger is still there. It has always been there. The hurricane breakdown was not an aberration. It was the cage bending under pressure, the constructed persona cracking to let through something of the original person underneath. And once you know this, everything about Ned reads differently. His patience with Homer is not saintly tolerance. It is pathological suppression. He cannot express anger because his brain was wired, literally rewired through sustained behavioral modification, to prevent it. The conditioning did not eliminate the anger. It built a wall around it, and every indignity Ned absorbs, every frustration he smiles through, every hurt he converts into a sunny expression and an enthusiastic endorsement of the Lord's will, adds one more brick to a wall that has been getting higher and higher since Ned was small enough to be carried by his beatnik parents to the therapist's office. His faith is not spiritual conviction in the simple, clean sense. It is a coping mechanism for a man who needs an external framework, a framework bigger than himself, bigger than the specific history of his specific damage, to explain why he keeps getting hurt despite doing everything right. If God has a plan, then Maud's death is not just a t-shirt in a moment of Homer's reflexive selfishness. It is part of something. It means something. The plan is unknowable, but it is a plan, and that makes the suffering endurable in a way that the alternative being that Maud died because Homer ducked, and there is no plan, and it was just random, and it means nothing, does not. And here is the detail that makes the theological dimension of Ned's story genuinely haunting. God talks to Homer. Homer has had multiple direct face-to-face conversations with God across the show's run. God has spoken to Homer, addressed him personally, engaged with his questions, participated in his dreams. God has been an active, responsive presence in Homer Simpson's life, the life of a man who sleeps through church, who has no particular religious conviction, who treats God as an authority figure to be negotiated with rather than a presence to be cultivated. God ignores Ned. Ned prays. Ned attends church every Sunday without fail. Ned has structured his entire life around his faith, has made every major decision through its lens, has endured losses that would destroy most people's relationship with whatever they believe in, and has somehow maintained his faith through all of it. And God does not answer. Homer, the man who falls asleep during the sermon and eats donuts when he should be praying, gets divine conversation. Ned, the man who has dedicated 36 years to his faith and tried harder than anyone in Springfield to live by its principles, gets silence. This is not random cruelty from the writers. This is a thesis statement. The show is telling you, through the specific contrast of Homer's theological luck and Ned's theological abandonment, that goodness is not rewarded in Springfield, that the system does not care about moral behavior. That compliance, the kind that the radiation theory describes as the result of neurological damage and the coma theory describes as the product of a dreaming brain, is what gets rewarded. And Ned is the most compliant person in Springfield because he was made compliant before he was old enough to choose otherwise. Ned Flanders is the show's darkest character. Not Burns, who is dark in a way that is self-aware and almost theatrical. Not Homer, who is dark in a way that is insulated by his own cognitive limitations. Ned, who sees clearly, who feels everything, who is capable of genuine love and genuine grief and genuine rage, and who was programmed as a child to suppress all of it in service of an endless performance of goodness that has brought him nothing. He does everything right. He lives in a system that does not reward rightness. Homer does almost nothing right. He lives in the same system and is, through the specific configuration of his damage and his luck and his family's love, somehow fine. They live next door to each other. They have lived next door to each other for 36 years. The gap between them, between the man who tries and the man who does not, between the man whose goodness costs him everything and the man whose failures cost him nothing, has never once closed. Because in Springfield, the gap does not close. The system is not designed to close it. The system is designed to keep Homer at the plant, and Ned at the church, and Molman in the ground, and Burns at the top, and everyone exactly where they are forever, in a loop that never breaks, and a town that never changes, and a Sunday evening that always, always resets. And here's the thing about this that the show has never quite said out loud but has always been true. The system is not maintained by villains alone. Burns is a villain, clear and deliberate and self-aware in his villainy, in the way that only the very richest and very oldest people can be self-aware. With the specific confidence of someone who has lived long enough to understand that the consequences of their actions will not arrive within their lifetime, and has made a kind of peace with that. Burns maintains the system because the system keeps him alive and powerful. That is simple. But the system is also maintained by Ned, by Homer, by every person in Springfield who has decided, consciously or through the slow accumulation of habit, to keep showing up for the terms the system offers. Ned maintains the system by forgiving Homer, by absorbing the damage without generating the resistance that might destabilize the arrangement. Homer maintains the system by coming back every morning. Marge maintains the system by keeping the family together through the specific, patient love that makes Homer's continued employment feel worth the cost. The people of Springfield maintain the system by voting to keep Tamzarian as Skinner, by watching Blinky on the news and shrugging, by forgetting the dome, by choosing the comforting fiction over the uncomfortable truth at every available opportunity. No one person is responsible. Everyone is responsible. The system is what emerges when an entire community agrees, generation after generation, that the cost of changing it is higher than the cost of living inside it. Which is, when you sit with it long enough, not actually a statement about Springfield. It is a statement about every place where people live in proximity to something that is harming them and have decided, because the alternative is too large and too frightening and too likely to cost them the things they depend on, to make their peace with the harm. The radiation in the water, the deal with the employer, the principal who is not who he says he is, the man who keeps dying and coming back without anyone asking why, the neighbor whose goodness is a cage and who God refuses to speak to while speaking freely to the man next door who does not deserve it. These are the people at the edges of the story, the ones who are not the Simpsons, the ones who are not the main characters, who exist in the show's peripheral vision, who have been cycling through their own loops for 36 years in the background of a story that is ostensibly about a family in the foreground. They matter. They have always mattered. Not because they change anything. They do not change anything. The system is not changed by the people inside it who suffer under it most visibly, but because they tell us the shape of the thing. Ned tells us what goodness costs. Molman tells us what the contamination does to the people it hits hardest. The real Seymour Skinner tells us what happens to the person who insists on the truth in a community organized around a comfortable lie. They are the cost of Springfield. They are the price of the Sunday evening that always resets, and the family that is always intact, and the beer that is always cold, and the loop that never breaks. Someone pays for every reset. Someone carries every consequence that was supposed to stick and did not. Someone is always tied to a train and expelled from the community because the community needs the story. It has chosen to be more real than the story that is actually true. That is Springfield. That is every Springfield. And that is, if you are willing to sit with it all the way to the end, what the show has been saying all along. Section 11. The Floating Timeline. Why nobody ages and what that means. Bart Simpson was 10 years old when The Simpsons premiered on December 17th, 1989. Bart Simpson is 10 years old right now. The gap between those two sentences is 36 years of real time in which the world has changed completely. The political landscape has shifted beyond recognition. The technology of daily life has been transformed multiple times over. Every telephone, every television, every car, every city, every cultural reference that appeared in the show's earliest seasons has been replaced or revised or rendered obsolete by the passage of time. We have had new wars and new presidents and new pandemics and new technologies that nobody in 1989 could have imagined in detail, only in outline. And Bart is still 10. Lisa is still 8. Maggie is still 1. Homer and Marge are still in their mid-30s, which means they got married younger than the timeline of the early episodes suggested, and that their high school experiences happened in decades that keep shifting forward as the present moves on. First the 1970s, then the 80s, then the 90s, now the 2000s, with each revision quietly replacing the last without ceremony or announcement. The term for this convention is the floating timeline. It is the approach used by long-running, serialized narratives, both animated and live action, to avoid the complications of characters aging in real time. The present is always the present. When the show airs in 2025, the characters are living in 2025. When it aired in 1995, they were living in 1995. The year changes. The cultural references change. The technology changes. The characters do not. Every long-running animated show does this. It is standard practice. It is why Bart has had a cellular phone in recent seasons and a Game Boy in earlier ones without anyone explaining what happened to the Game Boy. It is why Homer has had internet access and streaming services and smartphones without anyone noting that these things were not available in 1989. The world updates. The characters stay the same. Most people accept this without particular difficulty. We have agreed, collectively, not to track the math. We do not calculate how old Bart would actually be if he aged in real time. We do not note that Homer and Marge, if they were mid-30s when the show started, would now be in their early 70s and should probably be thinking about Medicare. We apply the convention automatically because we have learned to apply it to every long-running fictional series, and we do not think of it as evidence of anything. But The Simpsons has been running long enough that the floating timeline has produced contradictions so vast and so strange that they have started to crack the foundation of the show's internal reality in ways that are difficult to fully paper over with the standard explanation. The most obvious is the backstory problem. When the show began, Homer and Marge's history was grounded in the late 1970s and early 1980s. They met in high school during the Nixon and Ford and Carter administrations. Their courtship was set to era-specific music and reflected era-specific cultural anxieties. Homer's adolescence was shaped by Watergate and Vietnam and stagflation. Marge's was shaped by the women's movement and disco and the particular kind of American optimism that 1980 represented before it curdled. As the timeline floated forward, those anchors became untenable. If Homer and Marge are still in their mid-30s in 2025, they did not meet in 1978. They met around 2007. Their high school experiences were not shaped by Watergate. They were shaped by MySpace and the early internet and the post-9/11 United States, and a cultural context utterly different from the one the early seasons established. The show has acknowledged this explicitly. Flashback episodes depicting Homer and Marge's youth have been remade multiple times, each version placing their formative years in a different decade. They were hippies, and then they were punk fans, and then they were grunge fans, and then they were hipsters, and then they were millennials. The love story is the same in each version. The specifics of the era change completely. Their memories are unstable. Their origin story is a draft that keeps being revised to fit the present while maintaining the emotional through line that is the only fixed point in the whole shifting arrangement. They do not have a past. They have approximations of a past, whatever backstory is needed to make the current episode work, discarded without ceremony when the next episode needs something different. Now, the theories. The coma theory says nobody ages because they exist inside the frozen mind of an unconscious man. Homer went to sleep in April 1993 at a specific moment in the lives of the people he loves, and the dream preserves them at exactly that moment because his unconscious mind has no information about how they changed after he lost consciousness. It cannot imagine them older because it never saw them older. It can only run variations on the version of them that existed on the day the vending machine fell, cycling through scenarios and adventures and guest appearances and family crises, but always returning to the same ages, the same faces, the same frozen tableau of the life he is not living. The radiation theory says nobody ages because their biology has been so fundamentally altered by decades of nuclear contamination that the normal cellular mechanisms of aging have been disrupted. This is more speculative. Radiation typically accelerates aging rather than preventing it. But the radiation theory posits that Springfield's specific contamination, at specific concentrations over specific durations, has produced a mutation in the town's population that includes something like cellular stasis. Not health. Not normal functioning, just a freeze. The damage is profound, and the impairment is real, and the yellow skin, and the four fingers, and the cognitive fog are all evidence of that damage. But within the fog and the impairment, the cells have stopped doing the thing that cells eventually do in normal organisms. They have stopped progressing toward death. The collective denial theory says nobody ages because Springfield has agreed, collectively and without explicit discussion, not to allow it. This is perhaps the most interesting reading of the floating timeline, not as a biological phenomenon or a dream physics, but as a social contract. Springfield has demonstrated in The Principal and the Pauper episode that it is capable of agreeing, by majority vote, to treat demonstrable untruths as official reality. It has exiled the real Seymour Skinner for the crime of being real. It has made it illegal to mention certain truths under penalty of punishment. It has the institutional capacity to maintain fictions through communal agreement and social enforcement. What if the lack of aging in Springfield is the same mechanism? What if the residents of Springfield have collectively, implicitly agreed not to age? Not through any supernatural process, but through the same social contract that keeps Armin Tamzarian living under a stolen name and keeps the cracked cooling towers unremediated and keeps the three-eyed fish in a river that nobody tests. Springfield agrees not to notice things that would require uncomfortable action. Aging would require acknowledging the passage of time, which would require acknowledging that things have happened and changed and been lost and cannot be recovered. And Springfield does not do that. Springfield does not acknowledge irreversible change. It resets. And the resets are not passive. They are active. They require work. They require the same collective social infrastructure that voted to keep Tamzarian as Skinner, the same institutional capacity for organized forgetting that keeps the dome unreferenced in the episode after the movie, the same unspoken agreement that makes it possible for every catastrophe to be absorbed into the background of Springfield's ordinary life without leaving a visible scar. The floating timeline is the mechanism of the reset made visible at the scale of the entire show. Every episode ends, and the world goes back to the way it was, because Springfield's population, collectively and without discussion, has decided that is how the world will be. Not because nothing has happened, because acknowledging what happened is the one thing they will not do. The show itself has depicted the aging of its characters in flash-forward episodes, in what-if scenarios, in single-episode explorations of futures that are carefully quarantined from the main timeline so that they cannot disturb the permanent present. Lisa's Wedding, the Season 6 episode, shows Lisa as a 23-year-old woman about to be married. The future it depicts is detailed and emotionally resonant. Lisa has become the person the show has always suggested she would become, brilliant and principled and lonely and searching, finding connection in the world that matches her frequency in ways that Springfield never could. The episode is one of the most beloved in the series, in part because it allows the characters to grow in a way the main timeline permanently refuses. But it is a single episode, a glimpse, a window that opens and then closes. Lisa comes back to 8, Bart comes back to 10. The flash forward is filed away as a curiosity, a might have been, a future that the show acknowledges is possible, and then deliberately refuses to actualize. The show can imagine growth. It refuses to allow it. This is the most honest thing The Simpsons has ever done. It has looked at its own structure, at the mechanism of the floating timeline, at the convention that keeps its characters young and its family intact and its Sunday evenings perpetually available, and it has acknowledged the mechanism for what it is. Not a storytelling convenience, but a choice. A choice made not just by the writers, but by the audience. By us. We are the ones who keep the timeline floating. We are the ones who tune in every Sunday and expect Bart to be 10 and Lisa to be 8 and Homer to walk through the door at 5:30 after another day at the plant. We are the ones who would stop watching if the show aged its characters in real time. If Bart went to college and Lisa moved to New York and Maggie learned to talk, and Homer retired and the house on Evergreen Terrace stood empty on Sunday evenings. We do not want that story. We have never wanted that story. We want the version where the kids are always young and the family is always together, and the looping present never resolves into a past. The floating timeline is not what the show does to us. It is what we do to the show. The Simpsons don't age because we stop them. We pressed pause in 1989 on a family sitting on a couch in a house on Evergreen Terrace in a town that should not exist, and we have been holding that pause button down for 36 years. Because releasing it means admitting that time has passed, that we are older now, that the couch we sat on as children watching the opening credits has been replaced or sold or sits in a house that belongs to someone else, that the world we grew up watching this show in is as gone as Springfield's first season, as irretrievable as Homer's 5%. The floating timeline is the show's thesis statement. The Simpsons are frozen in time because we need them to be, because they represent something we cannot afford to let go. The messy, chaotic, infuriating, indestructible, imperfectly loving American family that keeps getting knocked down and keeps getting up and keeps sitting back down on the same couch because the couch is home and home is the one thing worth dreaming about. If the timeline stops floating and starts landing, if Bart turns 11 and Lisa turns 9 and Maggie finally speaks, the show ends. The family grows up, the loop breaks, and that means admitting that all the years between then and now were real, and that the world moved, and that we moved with it, and that the Springfield we remember from our own childhoods is as much a dream as the one Homer is generating in his hospital bed. We cannot let that happen. We will not let that happen. So the timeline floats, and Springfield stays young, and Sunday evening is always available. There is one more layer to the floating timeline that deserves its own careful attention before we descend to the final level. It is the layer that the show itself has acknowledged, indirectly but unmistakably, in the specific episodes it has chosen to make about the passage of time. Lisa's Wedding, Season 6, Episode 19. A flash-forward episode depicting Lisa at age 23, in the future of the year 2010, engaged to be married to a well-meaning British man named Hugh Parkfield. The episode is set at a Renaissance fair that Lisa attends as an adult, triggered by a fortune teller who shows her a vision of her future. The future it depicts is detailed and emotionally resonant in a way that many of the show's present-tense episodes are not, because knowing it is temporary, knowing it will be locked away at the episode's end and never revisited, gives it a specific quality of poignancy that permanent things cannot achieve. Lisa in this future is exactly the person the show has always suggested she would become. Brilliant, principled, accomplished in ways that Springfield never had the infrastructure to support. She works in a field that values her intelligence. She has found in Hugh a person who matches her frequency. She is not lonely in the way that 8-year-old Lisa is lonely, because she has escaped the specific confinement of Springfield and found a world that can hold her. But she has not escaped everything. The episode's emotional core is a moment near the end where Lisa realizes that Hugh, for all his genuine love of her, does not understand her family the way she needs him to understand them. He does not understand why someone as accomplished as Lisa would want to maintain connection to Homer, who is loud and embarrassing and constitutionally incapable of meeting the standards that Hugh represents. He does not understand the specific love that exists in the Simpson household, despite and because of everything that is wrong with it. He does not understand that the wrongness and the love are not separable, that one cannot be kept and the other discarded. Lisa chooses her family. She chooses Homer. She chooses the specific, impossible, infuriating love of a father who means everything and does little reliably except mean everything. And then the episode ends, and Lisa returns to 8, and the flash forward is filed away. The show can imagine Lisa grown up. It chooses not to allow it. And the reason it cannot allow it is the same reason it cannot allow any of the characters to age. Because the moment Lisa is 23, she is no longer the Lisa who plays saxophone in her room and fights alone against a community that does not want to be improved. She is a woman, an adult, someone who has passed through the childhood that the show has frozen and come out the other side, And the person who comes out the other side is not the person the show is about. The show is about the child. The show is always about the child. Because the child is the version of Lisa that needs protecting, that is still fighting, that has not yet found the world that can hold her. The adult Lisa has found it or is on the way to finding it. She does not need the show anymore. The show needs her to still need it. This is the deepest truth about the floating timeline. The show is not frozen because of production decisions, or storytelling conventions, or audience expectations, though all of those things are real and operative. The show is frozen because the characters at the ages they are, 10 and 8 and 1 in mid-30s, are the characters who have the most at stake in every episode. They are the characters who are still in the middle of becoming. Lisa at 8 is still fighting. Bart at 10 is still defiant without knowing what he is defiant against. Maggie at 1 is still accumulating the intelligence she will eventually use for something, waiting for the right moment the show has never depicted. Homer at 39 is still holding the family together through sheer force of love despite every cognitive and circumstantial obstacle. Age them, and the stakes change. Bart at 46 is not a rebel anymore. He is a middle-aged man whose rebellion has either become something or resolved into something else, and either way, the story the show was telling about him is complete. Lisa at 42 has either found the world that can hold her or has accepted that she will not. Either resolution ends the argument that makes Lisa interesting to watch. Maggie at 37 would have spoken by now, would have revealed whatever the silence has been protecting, and the show would have to reckon with whatever that revelation produced. The floating timeline protects the story by keeping the characters at the age where the story is still open, where the question of who they will become is still a question, where the love and the damage and the impossible circumstances are still doing what they do, to people who are still becoming people rather than people who have finished becoming and must now live with what they became. This is why the floating timeline feels, when you sit with it long enough, less like a production convenience and more like a philosophical statement. The show is not saying that these characters will never age. It is saying that these characters, at these ages in this configuration, are worth preserving in the specific moment of their becoming, and that some stories are worth telling indefinitely as long as the people inside them still have something at stake. Bart Simpson will always have something at stake as long as he is 10 years old in Springfield. The moment he turns 11, the stakes shift. The show is protecting his stakes by keeping him 10. The show is protecting all of them, preserving them in the most interesting moment of their existence, holding them there with care and with love and with the specific tenderness of a storyteller who understands that what is being preserved is not just a character, but a version of childhood itself, a version of the American family at a specific and irreplaceable pitch of aliveness before the resolutions come and the stakes change and the becoming is finished. That is the floating timeline. Not a trick, not a shortcut, a preservation. Section 12. The bottom of the iceberg. Every theory converges. We have spent a long time in Springfield tonight, long enough for the hour to have changed, long enough for the room to have settled into the particular quality of quiet that only arrives in the small hours, when the sounds of the day have finally finished, and what remains is a silence that feels slightly alive, slightly attentive, slightly as though it is listening back. This is the hour when things that seemed complicated in daylight become simple, and things that seemed simple reveal themselves to be complicated. And the distance between what a show is and what it means collapses to something you can actually touch. This is a good hour for Springfield, because the show has always belonged to this kind of attention. It has always been most honest with the people who were paying quiet, unhurried attention, rather than looking for the quick hit of the famous joke, the famous moment, the famous freeze frame that everyone has already seen. The depth of The Simpsons is not accessible at speed. It accumulates. It requires time and repetition and the willingness to let the smaller things land, the details that the show dropped once and never returned to, the implications it chose not to pursue, the questions it asked through its structure that it was never going to answer through its dialogue. So let us sit with it a little longer. Let the room stay quiet. Let Springfield be strange and familiar simultaneously, the way it has always been. And let us see what happens when we put everything we have found tonight into a single frame and look at the picture it makes. We started at the surface, the yellow skin that everyone accepts as an art style, the four fingers that everyone accepts as an animation shorthand, the town that borders four different states in four different episodes, the billionaire who cannot remember his employee's name, the baby who has not spoken a meaningful word in 36 years, the man who has been 10 years old since 1989. These are the things that sit on top, visible to everyone, normalized by repetition, absorbed into the background of what The Simpsons is without anyone needing to decide that they are normal. And then we went down. We traced the radiation leaking from Burns's plant into Springfield's water supply, its air, its food chain, the bodies of its residents, the minds of its population. We watched the contamination work its way through 3 generations of the Simpson family, yellowing the skin and distorting the proportions and suppressing the cognition, and in the specific and strange case of Hans Moleman, accelerating the aging to a degree that makes a man 31 years old look as though he has already lived 90 years in a body that keeps coming back from death, because the cellular machinery the radiation built into him cannot quite stop working even when the organism stops. We entered Homer's coma. We sat with the evidence that everything since April 1st, 1993 has been a dream being generated inside the mind of a man lying in a hospital bed in Springfield General, and we found that the evidence is not thin. It is woven into the structure of the show itself, into the tonal shift and the aging freeze and the celebrity flood and the escalating surrealism and the conversation that God had with Homer 6 months before the vending machine fell, telling him, in the precise and patient way that God apparently speaks when Homer is the audience, that his time was coming but was not yet here. We reopened the Burns shooting and found that the official answer does not fully account for its own evidence. We found a sundial clue that Burns himself described as a coincidence. A gun missing from its holster before the attack occurred. Last words that presuppose familiarity. An alternate ending that was fully produced and fully voiced. A confession in season 18 that produced no investigation. A final shot of a 1-year-old checking to confirm she is alone before privately reenacting a trigger pull. We found a mystery that was closed rather than solved, in a town that has always been better at closing things than at resolving them. We traced Burns's immortality through the weekly radiation treatments that keep his diseases in their precarious equilibrium and his body barely functional by any normal biological standard, and we understood that the immortality is not supernatural and not biological. It is financial. It is the engineered outcome of a man who has had enough resources for long enough to build a life support system so comprehensive and so entrenched that the distinction between the man and the system has become difficult to locate. Burns is alive because Burns can afford to be alive. Everyone else in Springfield is alive at the tolerance of whatever their bodies can manage without the treatments, without the pharmaceutical support, without the weekly recalibration. The town gets the exposure. Burns gets the management of the exposure. The asymmetry is the system. We watched a baby spend 36 years in the most effective long-term concealment operation Springfield has ever seen, maintaining the performance of helplessness while demonstrating, in every episode that bothers to look at her carefully, a cognitive capacity that exceeds every other person in her family and most people in the town. We understood that her silence is strategy, and her strategy was formed by watching what happened to the last person in the family who chose to be visibly intelligent in a place that does not reward visibility. We followed Mona Simpson through 1969 and through the exile that one moment of compassion cost her, and we traced the damage forward, through Abe's deal with Burns, through Homer's childhood, through the specific configuration of psychological damage that made Homer the ideal employee for the specific kind of employer Burns needed, through 30 years of Homer working for the man who made him, the way he is without ever fully connecting the employer to the architect of his own damage. We counted the predictions and found that most of them are trend extrapolation rather than prophecy, and that the ones which are not fully explained by trend extrapolation are not supernatural either, but are evidence of a show with a highly educated writing staff that spent 36 years paying closer attention to where American culture was heading than most people were willing to look. And we found that the show's cultural influence may have shaped some of what it appeared to predict, making certain outcomes feel familiar and therefore inevitable before they arrived, which is its own kind of power and more interesting than prophecy anyway. We looked for Springfield on a map and found it everywhere and nowhere. We understood that the geographic ambiguity is intentional and has been maintained as policy for 36 years, and we found three different explanations for it. The production explanation, which is universal relatability, the radiation explanation, which is contamination warping the physical landscape, and the coma explanation, which is dream geography assembled from fragments of everywhere Homer has ever been. And we found the legal explanation underneath all of them, which is that a town with no fixed jurisdiction has no fixed regulatory authority. And no fixed regulatory authority means no consistent oversight of the facility at the center of everything. We watched Ned Flanders perform goodness for 36 years in a system designed to not reward it, and we saw the cage his conditioning built around the person he originally was. And we understood that the cage serves the community's need for a manageable Ned rather than Ned's own flourishing. And we noted that God speaks to Homer and is silent with Ned, which is not cruelty from the writers, but the show's most explicit thesis statement about what Springfield rewards. Now, here at the bottom, every theory we explored tonight is different. The radiation theory is biological and environmental. The coma theory is perceptual and psychological. The denial theory is social and political. The immortality theory is economic. The prediction theory is cultural. Each one uses different evidence. Each one makes different assumptions about what the show fundamentally is and what kind of meaning it is trying to generate. They should not converge. They approach the same subject from different directions with different tools. And they all arrive at the same place. Something is wrong in Springfield. Something structural. Something that goes deeper than the art style and the animation shortcuts and the episodic reset and all the other production decisions that could, in the absence of everything else, account for the individual anomalies. The wrongness is not accidental. The wrongness is the show's subject. The wrongness is what the show has been about since the second season introduced a three-eyed fish, and the town watched it on the news and shrugged and moved on. The radiation theory says the people of Springfield are mutated. Their biology has been altered by decades of environmental contamination from a facility that has been leaking radioactive material since before most of them were born. The yellow skin is a symptom. The four fingers are a symptom. The cognitive suppression is a symptom. The inability to age is a symptom. The three-eyed fish is the visible marker of a contamination that has been working through every organism in the downstream environment for 36 years, and the people of Springfield cannot see it because the contamination has also worked through the part of their brains that would be responsible for connecting visible symptoms to environmental causes. The coma theory says the people of Springfield are not real. They are constructs generated by a dreaming brain from fragmentary memory, preserved at the ages and characteristics they had. At the moment consciousness ended, cycling through variations of the life the dreaming man most wants to be living. The wrongness that we perceive as viewers is the wrongness of a simulation running on degraded hardware. The physics that does not quite hold, the consequences that evaporate between episodes, the characters that survive things they should not survive because the dreaming mind cannot allow them to die. The denial theory says, the people of Springfield know at some level that something is wrong. They have always known. They have voted, in at least one canonical episode, to make that knowing illegal. They have exiled the man who showed up with evidence that the official story was a lie. They have maintained, across 36 years of catastrophes and resets and impossible events, a collective social contract that says we do not speak of the things that would require us to change. The wrongness is visible, and the response to its visibility is institutional. Springfield does not forget by accident. It forgets by choice, and the choice is made again in every episode when the disaster resets, and the screen cuts to black, and the next episode begins as if nothing happened. The immortality theory says the wrongness has a source and the source has a name. Burns is the wrongness. Burns is the origin point, the architect, the man who built the system that produces the contamination that impairs the cognition, that prevents the population from recognizing the system that produces the contamination. He is alive because he can afford to be alive. He is alive because his wealth has purchased the medical infrastructure required to manage what the radiation does to a body at the level of exposure he has sustained for a century. He is alive because he built a closed loop that sustains him while degrading everyone around him. And the degradation of everyone around him is not a side effect of the loop. It is the purpose of the loop. All four are saying time does not work in Springfield. Consequences do not hold. Memory does not persist. The rules of biology and physics and social accountability that govern the rest of the world apply in Springfield only intermittently, only for the duration of an episode, only until the reset comes and wipes the slate. And the characters who live inside this cannot see it. Homer cannot see it because the damage is in the part of him that would see it. Burns cannot see it because the infrastructure of his wealth has insulated him from every consequence that might have shown him what he has done. Ned cannot see it because the conditioning prevents him from maintaining the kind of sustained anger that clear seeing would require him to feel. Maggie can see it. Maggie has been seeing it for 36 years from behind the most effective disguise in the history of the town. But she has chosen, with full understanding of the costs and benefits, to say nothing. Lisa can see it. Lisa has always been able to see it. Lisa is the character the show built specifically to be the person who can see clearly in a place designed to prevent clear seeing. And Lisa pays for that clarity every episode with the specific and grinding loneliness of the person who knows something that no one around her wants to know. And we can see it. We have always been able to see it from outside the frame, from the comfortable distance of the audience. We watch Springfield from the position that allows us to see what the characters cannot. The radiation in the water, the coma in the hospital, the denied truth exiled on a train car, the baby with genius-level intelligence hiding behind a pacifier, the ancient man powered by weekly radiation treatments whose skin glows in the woods outside town. We can see all of it. But here's the thing that none of the theories accounts for. The thing that sits below even the deepest level we have reached tonight. We have always been able to see it, and we kept watching anyway. Not despite the wrongness. Not as confused observers who somehow missed what the show was doing. We kept watching because of the wrongness, or at least alongside it, holding both things simultaneously. The understanding of what Springfield is and the love of Springfield exactly as it is. The awareness of the contamination and the continued willingness to drink the water anyway. Metaphorically speaking, because the water is warm and familiar, and the family is there, and the couch is comfortable, and the Sunday evening on Evergreen Terrace is the most consistently available home in American television history. That is the thing at the very bottom. Not a theory, not an explanation. A fact about ourselves that the show has been quietly accumulating evidence for since 1989. We normalized it. We normalized all of it. The yellow skin and the four fingers and the ageless children and the immortal billionaire and the glowing safety inspector and the three-eyed fish and the town with no location and the baby who shot a man and the man in the coma who never woke up. We received each impossible thing as it arrived, and we filed it under just how things are in Springfield, and we kept watching. We kept laughing. We kept buying the merchandise and sharing the clips and debating the theories and returning, Sunday after Sunday after Sunday, to the same couch, the same family, the same impossible town. We became Springfield. Not literally, not in the sense of yellow skin or four fingers or cracked cooling towers, in the sense that the show has been holding up a mirror for 36 years, and we have been looking into it long enough that the boundary between observer and observed has become genuinely difficult to locate. Springfield reflects America. We are America. Springfield is therefore, in some real and uncomfortable sense, us. The nuclear plant and the corrupt billionaire and the captured regulator and the population too distracted and impaired to consistently identify the sources of its own suffering. These are not observations about a fictional town. They are observations about the actual country filtered through yellow skin and four fingers and handed back to us with a laugh track, and we accepted the laugh track as permission not to take the observations too seriously. But the observations are serious. They have always been serious. The show has been saying serious things in a funny voice for 36 years, and we have been laughing at the voice and receiving the serious things into the part of ourselves that stores serious things without fully examining them. And the result, after 36 years of this, is that we understand Springfield with an intimacy that goes beyond anything a fictional universe should be able to achieve. We understand its logic. We can predict its behavior. We know, without being told, how Springfield will respond to a crisis. With panic, and then with normalization, and then with collective forgetting, so efficient that by the next episode the crisis might as well have never happened. We know this because it is familiar. We recognize the pattern not from other shows, but from the actual world, from the actual places we actually live, from the actual dynamics of actual communities that have gotten very good at looking directly at something wrong and deciding, collectively and without discussion, that this particular wrong thing does not require a response today, that there are larger priorities, that the economy depends on it, that the alternative is worse. That is the bottom of the iceberg, not a theory about radiation or dreams or denial or immortality or the specific suppression of inconvenient truths in a town that made honesty illegal in one canonical episode. All of those theories are there, and all of them are supported by the evidence, and all of them illuminate something true about the show. But the bottom of the iceberg is this. The Simpsons is a show about the capacity of people who love each other to live inside impossible systems and keep finding reasons to stay. It is about the specific human ability to hold two incompatible things simultaneously: the knowledge that something is wrong and the decision to love it anyway. Because the alternative is losing the thing you love, and losing the thing you love is the one outcome the human heart is least equipped to accept. Homer knows on some level that his job is wrong, that his town is wrong, that the man who employs him is the man who destroyed his family. The crayon keeps the knowledge from fully forming, but it is there underneath, in the structure of his choices, if not in the conscious articulation of his reasons. And he makes the choice every day to go back, to clock in, to put his badge on and sit down at the workstation and do the job that keeps the lights on and the family fed and the house on Evergreen Terrace warm on Sunday evenings. He makes this choice because the house is worth it, because Marge is worth it, because Bart and Lisa and Maggie are worth it, because the beer is cold and everyone is home and nowhere else to be, and in that moment, on that couch, the system that produced him and the damage that has accumulated in him and the impossible wrongness of the town he lives in all recede into the background, and what is left is just the family, just the people, just the specific, ordinary, irreplaceable warmth of being somewhere and being loved there. That is what Homer is dreaming about, if he is dreaming. That is what the radiation cannot take from him if he is contaminated. That is what Burns never managed to destroy, despite destroying everything else he touched. The family on the couch. Every theory in this video converges not on an answer, but on a feeling. The feeling of watching a show that has been running for 36 years and understanding in some wordless way why it keeps going. Why we keep watching. Why the ending of The Simpsons, when it eventually comes, will feel like a loss that is disproportionate to the loss of a television program, because what ends will not be a television program. What ends will be the last place where certain things were always available, where Bart was always 10, where Marge's hair was always up, where Homer always stumbled through the door at 5:30, and the family always somehow reassembled itself around the couch, and the evening always somehow held together despite everything. The show will end someday. Everything ends. The floating timeline will eventually have to land. And when it does, when the show finally acknowledges the passage of 36 years and allows the characters to age into the people they would have become if time had been allowed to work on them, it will be one of the strangest endings in the history of American television. Because it will not feel like the end of a show. It will feel like the end of a version of ourselves. The version that sat cross-legged in front of the television on a Sunday night and heard that theme music and felt something uncomplicated. That version is still there. It is always there in the specific part of the brain that stores the things from childhood that were not important in any objective sense, but were important in the sense that they were the background against which everything else was experienced. The couch, the music, the yellow faces, the family that never changes. They are still there. They will still be there when you come back to them. That is the whole point of the floating timeline. That is the whole point of the yellow skin and the four fingers and the ageless children and the immortal billionaire and the baby who says nothing and the coma that never ends. The point is that some things do not have to end just because time passes. The point is that love does not obey the same rules as everything else. The point is that a man can dream about his family forever, and the dream never has to stop being warm. Springfield is wrong in every way the theories describe, and Springfield is home. And home is worth coming back to, even at this hour, especially at this hour. Let the room be quiet. Let your eyes close if they want to. Let the theories recede into the background the way the sound of Springfield recedes when the credits roll. And what remains is just the feeling of having been somewhere that knows you. Somewhere that has been waiting. Somewhere that will still be there tomorrow, and next Sunday, and the Sunday after that. The show that never ends is still on somewhere. Bart is still 10. Lisa is still 8. Homer is still dreaming, and the couch on Evergreen Terrace is still warm. There is one more thing that belongs here at the very end, after all the theories and all the evidence and all the deep-running implications of what we found down there in the iceberg's lowest levels. The Simpsons is 36 years old. It has outlasted the careers of most of the people who made it in its earliest seasons, the childhoods of most of the people who watched it, the relevant cycles of dozens of shows that came after it, and peaked about and declined while The Simpsons continued. It has been present for the full span of what we think of as modern American culture, from the late Cold War to the internet age to the social media era to whatever is happening now. It has been the background to all of it, the wallpaper of a generation, the show that was always on somewhere when everything else was changing. And in all that time, across all those seasons and episodes and theories and debates and predictions that came true and predictions that didn't, across all the cultural arguments about whether it was still good and whether it had peaked, and whether the Golden Age episodes were better, and whether the modern seasons deserved the name. Across all of it, one thing has never been true of The Simpsons. It has never stopped being about love. Not romantic love, though that is there in Homer and Marge's marriage. Imperfect and enduring, and the emotional axis around which the whole family turns. Not the love of grand gestures or declarations. The love of continuing, the love of showing up. The love that is expressed not through what you say, but through the fact that you keep being there, keep walking through the door at 5:30, keep sitting down on the couch, keep being the person whose presence is the baseline against which everything else in the house is measured. Homer loves his family in a way that is so total and so unconditional and so completely unmodified by his considerable failings that it constitutes the show's thesis statement about what love actually is when it is not being performed for an audience. It is not the love of the person who always does the right thing. It is the love of the person who always comes back, who fails and comes back, who disappoints and comes back, who falls asleep and knocks things over and eats things he should not eat and drives the car through the garage door and comes back and comes back and comes back because the family is worth coming back to, and not coming back is the one failure that Homer Simpson, for all his comprehensive catalog of other failures, has never committed. That love is why the coma theory is not a sad reading of the show. It is the most loving reading of the show. If Homer is dreaming, if every episode since April 1993 is the product of a mind that chose, in the only way available to it, to stay near the people it loves, then every episode is an act of refusal. A refusal to be fully absent. A refusal to let the family exist without him entirely, even if the only version of him that can still be present is the version that lives in the dream. The dream is not a tragedy. The dream is the most Homer-like response imaginable to the most Homer-like situation imaginable. He found a way to stay. He is still there, he is still on the couch, still stumbling through the door at 5:30, still improbably surviving the things that should have ended him, because his brain will not allow the story where he is not there. That is not a nightmare. That is love at its most stubbornly, embarrassingly, completely unconditional. The radiation theory is also, ultimately, a story about love. It is a story about what happens to people who love each other when the place they live in is destroying them, and what they do in response, which is not what you might expect. They do not leave. They stay. They adapt. They absorb the contamination and they develop the mutations, and they lose the cognitive function and they maintain the four-fingered grip on each other and on the life they have built in the contaminated zone, because leaving would mean leaving each other. And leaving each other is not something the family on Evergreen Terrace does. The contamination is real. The love is also real. And in the specific economy of Springfield, the love has always been stronger than the contamination. Not because love conquers all in some abstract greeting card sense, but because the love is what is left when everything that can be taken has been taken. Burns took Homer's mother. Burns took Homer's potential. Burns took the clarity that would have allowed Homer to understand what was being taken. And what is left after all of that taking is still enough. The family on the couch, the specific warmth of that specific configuration. Marge and Homer and Bart and Lisa and Maggie in the same room, at the same time with nowhere else to be. That is what Burns could not take. That is what the radiation could not reach. That is what survives the coma and the denial and the floating timeline and the 36 years of cycles and resets. It survives because it is the thing the show has always been about. Not the mysteries, not the theories, not the buried storylines or the prediction phenomenon or the immortal billionaire or the contaminated water or the baby with the off-the-charts IQ. Those are what make the show interesting as an object of analysis, as an iceberg to be descended into, as a text to be examined from every possible angle until the angles start to tell you something larger than any individual episode intended. But the show is about the family. It has always been about the family. The mysteries are the water the family swims in. The family is why we care about the water. So, here at the end, here in the quiet of whatever hour this has become, let the theories recede to the background where they belong, not because they are wrong or because they do not matter, but because they were always in the service of something larger than themselves. They were the means of arriving here, at this, at the feeling of knowing Springfield a little more truly than you did before, knowing what it costs and what it contains, knowing the contamination and the dream and the denial and the impossible persistence of love in a place that was not designed to foster it. Carry that with you when you close this video and go back to watching the show. Watch Homer fall and get up. Watch Marge hold the family together with the specific, quiet strength of someone who decided long ago who she was going to be and has never once wavered from that decision. Watch Bart choose chaos because chaos is the only form of freedom available to a 10-year-old boy in a system that does not have anything better to offer him. Watch Lisa fight alone, as she has always fought, knowing the cost and fighting anyway because fighting is what she has instead of giving up. And giving up is not in her. Watch Maggie watch everything from behind the pacifier, enormous patient eyes taking in the world that she has been studying for 36 years, waiting for the moment she has chosen not to tell us about yet. Watch the family. Know what it is made of. Know what it has survived. Know what it is still surviving, episode after episode, in a town that should have broken it decades ago and has not managed to, not quite, not all the way. And when the credits roll and the couch gag ends and the show resets and everything goes back to the way it was before the episode began, understand that the reset is not forgetting. The reset is the dream refusing to end. The reset is Homer's mind keeping the story alive because the story is the family, and the family is worth keeping alive through whatever means are available. That is what Springfield is. That is what it has always been. A man dreaming about his family, a family surviving a contaminated town, a town held together by collective love of a fiction that became, over 36 years and 788 episodes, more real than most real things. Sleep well. See you in Springfield. It always is. That is the whole point. Thank you for spending this time in Springfield with me. If you are still awake, you are genuinely remarkable. This goes deep. And if you drifted off somewhere in the middle, I hope whatever you were dreaming about was as warm as Springfield on a Sunday night. Drop a comment and tell me your favorite theory from tonight, or the detail that is going to stay with you longest. And if you have not subscribed yet, you have sat through the entire iceberg. You have absolutely earned it, and there are more of these waiting for you when you come back. Sleep well. See you in Springfield. We became Springfield. Not literally. Not in the sense of yellow skin or four fingers or cracked cooling towers. but in the sense that the show has been building a mirror for 36 years, and we have been looking into it long enough that the boundary between observer and observed has blurred in ways that are difficult to fully articulate, but impossible to fully deny. The nuclear power plant, the corrupt and aging billionaire, the safety inspector who cannot do his job, the population too cognitively overloaded to consistently connect the causes of their problems to their effects, the endless cycle of catastrophe and institutional forgetting, the system that is too entrenched and too economically necessary to challenge. These are not alien phenomena that the show conjured from pure imagination and projected into a fictional universe for our entertainment. They are observations. They are the show's sharp and patient and consistently accurate observations of the actual world, filtered through satire, given yellow skin and four fingers and a name, and placed in a town that could be anywhere so that nobody could claim they did not live there. Springfield is a diagnosis. The Simpsons has always been a diagnosis. The three-eyed fish is in the river. The cooling towers are cracked. The safety inspector is asleep at his workstation. The billionaire is still alive, maintained by treatments that the people downstream of his plant could never afford, running the facility that poisons their water and attending church to thank God for the continued blessings of his extraordinary longevity. And somewhere in Springfield, a baby with extraordinary intelligence is watching everything from behind the most effective disguise in the history of the town. Watching the family, watching the system, watching the billionaire and the inspector and the contaminated river and the sleeping town and the perpetual Sunday evening that never ends. Waiting. We do not know what she is waiting for. Maybe she is waiting for the right moment. The moment when whatever she has been planning, in the silence behind the pacifier and the enormous patient eyes, is ready to be actualized. The moment when the strategic patience pays off and whatever Maggie Simpson has decided to do about the world she has been observing for 36 years finally happens. Or maybe she is waiting for something else, something harder to name. The moment when someone finally looks at her and sees what is actually there, rather than what a baby is supposed to be. The moment when the disguise is no longer necessary because the world has changed enough to make it safe to be seen. Or maybe she is waiting for her father. If the coma theory is true, if Homer is lying in a hospital bed in Springfield General, dreaming the show we have been watching for 36 years, then Maggie is the part of his dream that he gave the most to. The most intelligence, the most capability, the most quiet, stubborn, strategic resilience. He could not protect her from outside the dream. He could not be there for her development, her first steps, her first real words, the person she was becoming, in the actual waking world where he was not present. So, in the dream, he made her extraordinary. He made her the person who would be okay no matter what. And maybe she is waiting for him to know that, waiting for him to understand what he gave her, waiting for some version of the dream that is clear enough, some episode that is grounded enough in something true, to carry the message from his youngest child back to whatever part of his sleeping mind generated it. She is okay, Homer. She has always been okay. You made her okay before you went under. These are the things that sit at the bottom of the Simpsons iceberg. Not answers. Springfield does not deal in answers. Answers would require acknowledging that questions have been asked, and Springfield has made that acknowledgement illegal in at least one canonical episode. But depths. The show has depths that most 36-year-old television programs do not have, cannot have, because reaching those depths requires the specific combination of time and repetition and accumulation, and the slow, patient geological layering of detail upon detail upon detail that only a show this long-running could have produced. Every yellow face is evidence. Every four-fingered hand is evidence. Every reset, every forgotten catastrophe, every immortal billionaire, and every baby who has not spoken meaningfully for 36 years, all of it is evidence of something, of everything, of a show that has been telling you the same story every Sunday for 3 decades and trusting you, eventually, to hear what it is actually saying underneath the jokes. The stories are these. A man in a hospital bed dreams about his family because they are the only thing worth dreaming about. A town built on a contamination zone does not notice that it is contaminated because the contamination affects the part of the brain that would notice. A billionaire too powerful to die is kept alive by the same thing he uses to keep everyone around him small. A baby watches everything from behind the world's most effective disguise and waits for the right moment to speak. A mother kissed her sleeping son goodbye and disappeared into the night, and the shape of her absence is the shape of everything that came after. And a family sits on a couch in a house on Evergreen Terrace on a Sunday evening, and the television is on and everybody is home and nowhere else to be. And the kids are young and will always be young, and the beer is cold and the door is unlocked, and Homer will always stumble through it at 5:30, because this is the life and this is the family and this is the dream. This is always the dream. The loop is not the character's prison, it is ours. We built it, we maintain it. We press play every Sunday, and we tighten the loop a little more, make it a little harder for the Simpsons to escape from the amber we have set around them. Because if they escape, if the timeline stops floating and starts landing, if Bart turns 11 and Lisa turns 9, and Maggie says her second word and Homer finally wakes up, then it ends. And ending means that the version of ourselves that watched this show as children, on that couch in that house, in that world that no longer exists, is fully and finally and irreversibly gone. We are not holding on to Springfield, we are holding on to ourselves. The self that sat cross-legged out in front of the television on a Sunday night and heard that theme music and felt something uncomplicated and complete. The self that laughed at Homer and worried about Lisa and found Bart's defiance secretly thrilling and understood, without being able to articulate it, that this family was saying something true about families. Something about love and failure and the specific kind of devotion that looks from the outside like dysfunction and feels from the inside like home. We cannot let them go because letting them go means letting that self go. Acknowledging that the years have passed, that we grew up, that the show changed and the world changed and we changed with it. And the Springfield we remember, the specific version we encountered when we were small enough to be surprised by it, no longer exists anywhere except in our own archive, in the part of us that keeps the old episodes around. Not because we need to rewatch them, but because we need to know they are there. As long as The Simpsons is on, we can go back. We can press play and go to Evergreen Terrace and sit on the couch and watch the television, and feel, briefly, that the distance between now and then is navigable, that the road back to the room where we first watched this show still exists and can still be traveled, that something has stayed the same, even if nothing else has. That is what the show has always been. Not a prediction engine, not a conspiracy, not evidence of contamination or a coma or a collective denial operating at the level of the town's unconscious. All of those things are there in the text, and we have examined them tonight with the attention they deserve. But underneath them, underneath every theory and every buried story and every impossible detail that the show drops and never retrieves, underneath all of that, the show has always been about one thing: the desire for something to stay. Homer's coma dream is not a metaphor for the show's production decisions. It is the show's honest statement of what it is for. A man dreaming about his family because the dream is the only place they are still the way he remembers them. A dreaming mind generating Springfield episode after episode, season after season, because the alternative, the waking up, the real world, the children who are older now, the time that has passed, is the one thing it cannot bear to face. That is not just Homer. That is us. We are in the coma with him. We have been in the coma with him since April 1993. And every episode since then, every couch gag, and every guest star, and every impossible disaster that resets before the credits roll, is both of us refusing to wake up. Because waking up means finding out. And finding out means admitting what we already know. That 36 years have gone. That Bart would be 46. That the couch is different now. That the Sunday evening in the room where you first watched this show is as gone as Mona Simpson, as gone as the real Seymour Skinner, as gone as the 5% of Homer's brain that the vending machine took and never gave back. Gone, but not forgotten. Never forgotten. As long as the show is on. As long as the loop runs. As long as Springfield is still there, yellow-skinned and four-fingered and ageless, on the other side of the screen, doing the same impossible things in the same impossible town, week after week after week. Springfield will be here when you come back. It always is. That is the whole point. Thank you for spending this time in Springfield with me. If you are still awake, you are genuinely remarkable. This goes deep. And if you drifted off somewhere in the middle, I hope whatever you were dreaming about was as warm as Springfield on a Sunday night. Drop a comment and tell me your favorite theory from tonight, or the detail that is going to stay with you longest. And if you have not subscribed yet, you have sat through the entire iceberg. You have absolutely earned it, and there are more of these waiting for you when you come back. Sleep well. See you in Springfield.